Game of Thrones, The Attack of the Northern Wolf. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 51, Chance Encounter. Everyone in the inn hall was attracted by the noise of Robb's fist. Our leader was drunk and got a little excited when he heard the news. It's okay, it's okay. Seeing that Robb looked very bad, Eddard stood up quickly and explained to the diners in the inn hall with a smile. Adam, where did you hear the news? Is it reliable? That's right. When His Majesty was young, he was a great hero of Westeros. It's impossible for him to die so easily. I think he drank too much. After Eddard's explanation, the diners in the inn hall no longer focused their attention on Robb, but questioned Adam, who walked in and loudly said the information. I swear to the 7 gods, this news is absolutely true. It came from the Tower Castle. Is there anyone who dares to deliver a message specifically to deceive the Knight of the Hog family? Adam heard everyone's doubts, raised his right hand and swore, then immediately turned to the innkeeper and told him the ultimate purpose of coming to deliver the message. Old Jace, do you think my new news is worthy of a large glass of premium ale? The innkeeper knew that he usually would not tell false news, nodded, poured a large glass of bubbling ale, and stuffed it into his hand. Wow. So, the king really died in the belly of a prostitute? This is a brand new history of the 7 kingdoms. You can go to King's Landing tomorrow to see the excitement. I wonder if the funeral for the king will give free food to the civilians? Food should not be given at the funeral, but there will definitely be a tournament and a noble banquet for the coronation of the new king, so food should be given. The food of the nobles is a luxury. I used to have a cream chestnut soup, and it tasted so good. The death of His Majesty the King is indeed a big deal for the civilians of the 7 kingdoms, but they are more concerned about whether this incident can bring them some extra gains. Because of the sudden outbreak of this incident, Robb, who has been sorting out his thoughts, finally made a decision in his heart. Immediately travel overnight and try to get to King's Landing as soon as possible. After making the decision, Robb took action immediately. Without returning the silver deer to the innkeeper, he took everyone on horseback and drove the carriage in a hurry. In the thick night, Robb and his party drove forward with torches prepared in advance. Fortunately, the closer they got to the starting point of the King's Road, King's Landing, the flatter and easier the road was. In this way, they hurried, rested, and hurried, and soon arrived at the Gate of the Gods in King's Landing. The Gate of the Gods is located in the northwest corner of the King's Landing wall. Whether it is the iron gate or the door, this gate is engraved with extremely detailed carvings of gods. Those carved eyes seem to follow you and look at you. The King's Road in the north all enters King's Landing through the Gate of the Gods. Before, for the sake of concealment, Sir Roderick specially detoured to the old city gate, but as soon as he entered the city, he kept staring at his little finger and had already sent the golden cloak to wait for him. Since Robb and his party hurried on the road since dinner yesterday, it was still some time before dawn. But at this time, there were already many civilians, refugees, and caravan merchants queuing up to rest around the Gate of the Gods, waiting to enter the city at dawn. Seeing so many people queuing here, Robb, who was already anxious, ordered the Winterfell cavalry to wait in line here, and he took Eddard to the south. He wanted to see if he could find a way to enter the low and weak mud gate, river gate, that Tyrion defended in his previous life. If possible, then the rescue plan in his mind could be replanned. Without the carriage to slow down the speed, Robb and his entourage whipped their horses and soon arrived at the mud gate in the south of King's Landing. This gate is only 40 to 50 meters along the coast and leads to the Rose Avenue and King's Road in the south. When Robb and his entourage arrived at this gate, the crowd waiting here was no less than that of the Gate of the Gods. Just as he frowned and thought about how to enter King's Landing as soon as possible, the mud gate was opened in advance. Get out of the way, everyone in front, get out of the way. Hurry up and make way for the adults. Behind the opened mud gate, a cavalry team with torches appeared. A cavalryman riding in front of the road, holding a long sword, shouted at the people queuing on the road. Robb looked at the cavalryman wearing armor with a crown and a stag crest. His mind was full of thoughts, but his hands were not slow, and he directly called Eddard to drive the horse to the side of the road. The people in the queue dared not say much to this noble cavalryman, for fear that they would get into trouble if they were not careful. The crowd queuing on the King's Road suddenly parted like a wave, and the road was vacated very quickly. Da-da-da. As the cavalry team of more than 50 people approached quickly, 2 young and handsome knights in the middle were particularly eye-catching. A tall, short black-haired, handsome young knight, wearing armor with a crown and a stag crest, looked anxious. The other knight was slender, with long and flowing brown hair, and as handsome as a woman. Wearing armor engraved with countless flower emblems and a cloak woven from flowers on his shoulders, he kept comforting the black-haired knight. Lin Li, the Lord Justice of King's Landing, and Loras Tyrrell, the Knight of Flowers of Highgarden. Robb recognized the 2 highly recognizable celebrities at a glance. When he saw the cavalryman wearing the crowned stag armor just now, he had some bad guesses in his heart. When he saw the 2 of them hurriedly fleeing King's Landing at this time, Robb was very sure in his heart. Father, Eddard Stark must have been in trouble. Lin Li and the other man did not stop, and rode directly past Robb. Not to mention that Robb was disguised now. Even if he was not disguised, standing in front of the 2 people, they would definitely not recognize him. However, judging from his appearance alone, if it was any other free time, these 2 people would definitely be interested in him. Robb, who had already judged that his father was in trouble and the overall situation of King's Landing was settled, was not as anxious to enter King's Landing as before. He was very shocked by the news that King Robert died prematurely on the belly of a skilled woman, and was afraid that his father Eddard would also encounter unexpected changes. Now that he saw the escaped Lin Li and his companions, he knew that Eddard was isolated and helpless in King's Landing, and would not be able to cause any trouble, and would eventually be imprisoned in the dungeon. As for Sansa and Arya, whether it was the same as in the original drama or they were captured by Cersei, at least their lives were safe for the time being. Thinking that their lives were not in danger for the time being, Robb was relieved. After Lin Li and his party left, the gold cloaks guarding the city closed the mud gate again, and did not let anyone in. Robb looked carefully at the city gate and the city wall here, and then he and Eddard rode back to the Gate of the Gods in the north. Thanks to the arbitration agency for the 500-point reward, and the ignorant little book boy for the monthly ticket. At the same time, thank all the readers for voting and reading every day. P.S. The plot of King's Landing has begun. Please support the next book. Thank you. Chapter 52 Intelligence. Early the next morning, the King's Way outside King's Landing was filled with civilians, refugees, and merchants who were ready to enter the city. Creak, creak. The noise of the 2 heavy gates and iron gates of the Gate of the Gods opening was heard. A team of fully armed and serious looking golden cloaks walked out of the city gate, divided into 2 lines, and blocked the entrance of the Gate of the Gods. There was a rebellion in the Red Keep last night. By order of Her Majesty the Queen, all people entering and leaving King's Landing must be inspected. A golden cloak holding a parchment scroll stood at the city gate and shouted loudly. After shouting 3 times in a row, he waved his hand, and the remaining golden cloaks stood in the center of the city gate, dividing the city gate into 2. Everyone entering and leaving had to be inspected by them. Torhan, take 2 people and drive the last carriage. Wait for us at the inn we passed in front. Robb, who was in the middle of the queue, heard the words of the golden cloaks conveyed by the crowd in front, and he turned to Torhan and said, "Yes, leader." Torhan nodded, addressing Robb's disguised identity very seriously. Because there were so many people queuing to enter the city at the Gate of the Gods, Robb and his men were quite far away. Therefore, Torhan and his 3 men drove the special carriage carrying Bloodwind to the back, and the gold cloaks did not see it. The entry inspection was very slow, and when the sun was almost at its zenith, it was finally Robb and his men's turn. "Where are you from?" Several gold cloaks standing in the middle of the Gate of the Gods asked, while looking at the parchment in their hands, and comparing it with the faces of Robb and his men. "My lord, we are a small caravan from Flint's Finger. We received an order some time ago, and we pulled some wool on the carriage, to deliver it to the shop in the Shoemaker Square. Look, this is our shipping bill." Robb, who had a distinct northern accent, did not deliberately light at an eye that he was from the north. He bowed first, then replied to the gold cloaks with a flattering look, and finally took out the shipping bill that had been prepared long ago from his arms. Well, there is no problem with the cargo list. Let me check the 2 carriages. Okay, you guys quickly open the carriages and let the adults have a look. Seeing that the gold cloaks were going to check their carriages, Robb immediately shouted to Eddard and others to open the cargo compartment of the carriage. Well, there's nothing wrong with the cargo. The man in the golden robe drew out his sword and rummaged through the wool in the cargo box of the carriage. Seeing that there was nothing wrong, he sheathed the sword and said hesitantly, "But, I'll count. 1, 2, 16 people escorting these 2 carriages of wool." Upon hearing the question from the man in the golden robe, Robb immediately took out a few silver deer from his arms and put them in his hand quickly and stealthily. At the same time, he said loudly, "My lord, you may not know much about wool. These are the wool of northern spotted sheep, and the price is still relatively expensive in King's Landing. The North was at war some time ago, and many scattered deserters became robbers, so I would rather make less money and hire more guards." The man in the golden robe felt the silver deer stuffed in his hand. He quietly put it away. A smile appeared on his face and said, "I've heard before that the North seems to be at war. It's right to be careful. Okay, let's go." "Thank you, my lord." Hearing that they could pass, Robb smiled and greeted Eddard and others, and drove the carriage through the Gate of the Gods and into King's Landing. The stench in King's Landing was stronger than outside the city. Robb resisted the urge to cover his nose and pretended to be familiar with the smell here. Since the Shoemaker Square was right next to the Gate of the Gods, they passed through the city gate and soon arrived at the busy Shoemaker Square. After letting most of the Winterfell cavalry go to the store according to the address on the bill, Robb took Eddard and 2 cavalrymen and headed southwest of the Shoemaker Square to the iron street full of blacksmith shops. After searching for a long time according to the number plate in their hands, Robb and others finally found Master Angie's blacksmith shop. The 4 of them entered the blacksmith shop and saw at a glance that the blacksmith shop was full of naked upper body men, sweating and knocking on unformed weapons or farm tools with sparks flying. "I'm Master Angie. May I ask what do you need to buy?" Seeing the guests coming, a short old man with grey hair came up with a smile on his face. "I want to make a dagger that can be seen clearly in the dark." Robb looked at the short old man named Angie and spoke slowly. While speaking, he emphasized the word dark. Angie heard the smile on his face, but a strange color flashed in his eyes. He answered, "This special customization is not cheap. How about we go into the house to discuss it in detail? It's fine as long as it can be made. The cost is no problem." Robb nodded and answered, then turned to Eddard and the other 2 and said, "Wait for me outside. I will go into the house to discuss it in detail with the boss." "Yes, leader." Robb followed Angie past the blacksmith shop, where the big men were forging iron, and came to the restroom at the back. As soon as Angie turned around and closed the door, Robb couldn't wait to ask, "I want to buy the latest information about the King's Hand, Eddard Stark. This is not too expensive information. 2 gold royals, thank you." Hearing this, Angie smiled and quoted the price of the information. Robb nodded, took out the purse from his arms, counted out 2 gold dragons, and threw them to Angie. "In fact, you will know in 2 days. Last night, the King's Hand, Eddard Stark, and his guards attempted to rebel and usurp the throne. Lord Jaime Lannister and Lord Gregor Clegane captured him with the gold cloaks and the King's Good, and he is now imprisoned in the black cell of the Red Keep." Angie put the gold dragon into her pocket and immediately spoke out Eddard's information. Robb nodded after listening. His father Eddard was just as he expected. He was unwilling to use despicable means, and he could not cause any waves in King's Landing without any help. However, unlike the plot in the previous life, due to Robb's influence, Eddard did not directly determine that Tyrion Lannister was the murderer of Brandon, so his hostility towards Lannister was not that great. And the Vale Knights sent by Lesser are in, although they forcibly took Tyrion away in the name of Catelyn. But Jaime couldn't tell the truth directly, so he didn't impulsively attack Eddard, so he didn't flee King's Landing and return to Casterly Rock in the west. Even Jaime could restrain his impulse, and the shrewd Tywin didn't act rashly, so he didn't send the Mountain to lead the team to plunder the Riverlands. Information about his 2 daughters. Robb continued to inquire about the situation of his two sisters. 1 gold dragon, thank you. After receiving another gold dragon, Angie answered, this information is simpler. Sansa Stark was captured by the Hound and taken to the Red Keep. As for Arya Stark, we don't know where she went. She disappeared without a trace. Okay, I know. Well, I also need a detailed map of the Red Keep. 20 gold dragons. A map is so expensive? This thing is simple for you, right? At first, the price of the 2 pieces of information was okay, but when Robb heard Angie asking for a sky-high price for the map, he frowned and said, not wanting to be a sucker. Of course an ordinary red castle map wouldn't be so expensive, but I guess what you want, sir, is a detailed map of the Red Castle dungeon, including the Black Prison. This is not something that ordinary people can get, so the price matches its value. Angie chuckled and explained why this map was so expensive. Chapter 53 Spider. Robb knew that the information he had just asked for had already revealed his purpose. He counted the gold dragons from his pocket and said, I know that you are in the intelligence business and you all keep your promises. Just in case, I still give you a piece of advice. Abide by your professional ethics, and don't let me come to you again. Don't worry, sir. I have been doing this business in King's Landing for so many years. Of course I understand. Angie took the gold dragons handed over by Robb and answered with a smile while checking each gold dragon. Robb nodded when he heard it and didn't say anything more. He took the map that Angie put on the table and turned around and walked out. After walking out of Angie's blacksmith shop with Ed and the other 3, Robb and his party went straight to the shop on the Shoemaker Square and joined other Winterfell cavalry. This shop on the Shoemaker Square and Angie's blacksmith shop that sells intelligence were purchased through Ramsay's special channel. After all, it was not established by his own secret channels, so Robb didn't trust it very much. But as a disposable consumable, there is no problem at all. After all, the development time is too short. If he really sets up an intelligence point in King's Landing, I believe that, even if the gold cloaks check the city gate, they can find a way to transport Bloodwind in. After returning to the shop, Robb assigned the task of finding Arya to these cavalrymen according to the map of King's Landing. The dozen or so cavalrymen who were specially selected have all seen Arya's appearance, so there is no need to worry about the scene of meeting, but not knowing each other. As for how to find Arya, who even the intelligence agencies can't find, Robb has thought about it in his heart. He tried hard to recall his past life yesterday and vaguely remembered that Arya appeared before his father Ed was executed by Joffrey. At that time, she was in a civilian area using a captured pigeon to exchange for a piece of bread with the owner of the bakery, but was rejected. Now, due to Robb's influence, King's Landing has experienced unexpected changes. If you want to search, you can only follow this clue to narrow the scope of the search. Lord Robb, will Miss Arya be in this area? Eddard, who stayed beside Robb, asked Robb, who was staring at the map on the table. Well, it's about these 2 areas. As for whether we can find her, it depends on luck. Robb heard the question, sighed and answered. The area marked on the map is called Flower Street, and there are many small bakery workshops along the street. Going west along Flower Street, you will come to the slum called Flea Bottom. The streets in this area are all intricate narrow alleys and intersections, which are very consistent with the scenes in Robb's memory. As a royal city with a population of about 500,000, the average population density is quite large considering the overall scale of King's Landing. Therefore, if you want to find Arya among so many people, you must have very good luck with only a dozen people. On the first day of entering King's Landing, because of the night, the cavalry who returned empty-handed brought back some news from outside. In King's Landing, the number of patrolling gold cloaks increased significantly, and many Lannister soldiers also participated in patrolling and maintaining public order. Then, the Red Keep and the Great Sept of Baelor were hastily changing their decorations and arranging the funeral ceremony for King Robert. Many vagrants began to wander around the Red Keep and the Great Sept of Baelor in the hope of getting a job opportunity or some charity from the nobles. This was one of the reasons why Lannister soldiers participated in the security patrol. After all, more than 2,000 gold cloaks were responsible for guarding and checking the 7 city gates and maintaining the somewhat restless public order in the city. Obviously, there were not enough people in the shop that had been completely taken over by Robb. He was personally preparing dinner for a dozen cavalrymen who had been running all day. Eddard was helping him next to him. As for the ingredients, Eddard went out to buy them in the afternoon. The food in Westeros, the taste of the nobles' food is quite good, with a variety of different flavors. The taste of civilian food is simply indescribable. Simply put, it is just to fill the stomach. Robb and his men obviously couldn't go out to high-end restaurants and buy a large amount of expensive food. Moreover, in this world, where people are poisoned at any time, if conditions permit, the Chinese cuisine made by Robb himself is both safe and delicious. Click, click. Just as he and Eddard were busy preparing dinner, a wooden cabinet in the corner of the kitchen made two strange noises. Robb and Eddard looked at each other and stopped what they were doing. Robb tilted his head towards the shop outside, signaling Eddard to go out and call for help, while he reached out for the meat-cutting knife on the kitchen table. "Lord Robb, don't be nervous. I want to tell you the news about Lord Eddard." A soft and kind voice suddenly came from the wooden cabinet in the corner. I don't know if the person inside took the initiative to speak, because he heard the kitchen outside suddenly quiet down. "Well, come out first. If you have anything to say, we can talk face to face." Robb heard the words of the hidden person behind the wooden cabinet, and his vigilance eased a little, and he answered. He knew in his heart that, if there was an enemy inside, he would have taken the opportunity to attack just now. Click, click. As the wooden cabinet in the corner was pushed open, Robb saw the hidden person behind it. The other person was quite fat, and used a dark hooded cloak to cover his face. Behind him, there was a secret door on the wall. When the hidden person walked out, the secret door closed automatically. The closed secret door fits the wall perfectly, and there is no trace at all. No wonder Robb asked the Winterfell cavalry to check the entire store today, but they didn't find the secret door. Haha, Lord Robb, this is a hidden intelligence point. It is normal to set up a secret door, don't you think? The hidden person lifted his hood with both hands, chuckled, and said to Robb. Looking at the other person's highly recognizable appearance, Robb also smiled and said, "Yes, it is indeed normal, Lord Varys. That's right, the one who walked out of the secret door was Octopus Spider, the intelligence chief of King's Landing, Varys." His round and fat bold shape, coupled with his soft voice and silent walking posture, it is difficult for others to impersonate him. Lord Varys' little birds are indeed powerful. I deliberately disguised myself to come to King's Landing, but I didn't expect that you would come to my door on the first day. Excuse me, you just said that you wanted to tell me about my father. What did you mean? Knowing that the other party was harmless for the time being based on his past life memories, Robb immediately asked. My little bads are not as powerful as you say. The freezing cold in the north makes it difficult for them to sing. You did a good job covering the news. I didn't even know you had left Winterfell until this morning. Varys habitually put his hands into his sleeves, with a harmless, approachable, and kind smile on his face, and said, "As for why I heard about you today and suddenly came to visit. In fact, I sold this intelligence point, and I also built the blacksmith shop that sold the information to you. Thank you to the Fire King Willie and Khan Zirin for the coin rewards. At the same time, thank you to all the readers for voting and reading every day. P.S. A new week has begun, and this week's book has been strongly recommended. Dear readers, please vote for the next book. Thank you." Chapter 54 Secret Agent. Varys roughly explained to Robb why he knew his whereabouts, but did not answer his last question. Varys stood there in silence, constantly glancing at Eddard who was standing beside him. "Eddard, you go out first. No one can come in without my order." Robb certainly understood what Varys meant, and he turned his head to Eddard beside him and said, "But, Lord Robb, Eddard Stark, this is my order." Eddard stared at Varys, still a little worried about Robb's safety. He wanted to persuade him, but was interrupted by Robb directly. "Why? Are you still worried that I, a eunuch who will pant when walking too fast, will be disadvantageous to the young wolf lord who can kill dozens of enemies in one battle?" Looking at Eddard's vigilant eyes, Varys was relaxed and smiled self-deprecatingly. When Robb called his name seriously and said that this was an order, Eddard turned and walked out. Finally, hearing Varys' self-deprecation, He did not speak, looked at Varys deeply, and closed the kitchen door. Last night, Lord Eddard brought little Fina Janis Slynt, commander of the Gold Cloaks, and me to read out His Majesty Robert's will. As soon as the door closed, Varys was no longer relaxed, and immediately spoke with a serious expression, but except for me, the other two betrayed Lord Eddard. Now Lord Eddard is imprisoned in the Black Cell for treason, as you know. I can help you pass on a handwritten letter, asking you to make Lord Eddard admit the alleged treason, and recognize the new king's succession rights. In this way, Her Majesty the Queen will pardon his crimes, let him wear black clothes, and go to the wall. And your sister, Sansa Stark, will still be the queen of the new king, and the Stark family will continue to guard the north. Listening to Varys finishing the purpose of his trip in one breath, Robb shook his head and said, Lord Varys, you are too idealistic, not to mention whether Cersei will allow my father to wear black clothes. It is impossible to make my father admit treason, just because he saw my handwritten letter. I know that Lord Eddard can disregard his own life for honor, but can he bear to disregard the lives of his two daughters? When my father learned that I came to King's Landing, he knew that I would do my best to find and rescue my sisters. Then don't let him know that you came to King's Landing. I don't know if I'm in King's Landing. Are you sure that my father will believe that Cersei and others can keep their promises after admitting treason? After all, he has just been betrayed by little Fina and that Slynt. Then this. When the conversation between the two of them reached a stalemate, Robb finally spoke out what he wanted to achieve. Lord Varys, please take me to the Black Cell to see my father. I want to persuade him in person. Impossible. Lord Robb, that is the Black Cell on the 3rd floor of the Red Castle dungeon. Not to mention how you can get through the guards of the Red Castle. There are guards guarding and checking every floor in the prison. It is impossible to bring anyone in. After hearing what Robb said, Varys immediately shook his head and rejected his request. I know you have a way. Please believe me, I'm a man of few words. How you take me in, I will never tell anyone. I swear in the name of the Stark family. Robb was very sure that Varys could take people in and out of the Black Cell. He swore sincerely. I don't know why Robb was so sure that he could take people in and out of the Black Cell. Varys said hesitantly, Lord Robb asked me to think about this matter again. Well, I have been here long enough. I will answer your request next time. Okay, Lord Varys, please go slowly. Seeing that Varys did not refuse outright, Robb nodded and saluted him. When Varys was about to reach the corner of the kitchen, he suddenly turned around and said, Lord Robb, as far as I know, the Lannisters have a very powerful spy in Winterfell, and this spy has helped them obtain a lot of your secret information. Hearing this news, Robb replied with a smile on his face, Lord Varys, didn't you say that your little bird can't sing in Winterfell? Then how did you know this news? Haha, Casterly Rock is not as cold as the north, so. Click, click. Varys didn't finish his words. He put on his hood again, opened the secret door, and began to move the wooden cabinet used as a cover. Robb took 2 steps forward to help. While moving the wooden cabinet, he suddenly asked, Lord Varys, you can actually sell my information and let the Lannisters catch me. If you are caught, the North will forget all this, and the 7 kingdoms will not go to war again. The wooden cabinet slowly moved back to its original position, and Varys' gentle answer came from inside. Of course not, the North will never forget. Robb heard this, and shook his head decisively. Well, Lord Eddard is a rare good lord. From what I've seen so far, you will also be a kind lord. Am I kind? At least, Little Egg's mother will think you are very kind. Click. The wooden cabinet in the corner of the kitchen was restored to its original state, and no sound came out of it. Although there are many things he said that I can't believe. However, he is really a person with special charisma. Robb carefully recalled the conversation between the two just now, and couldn't help but praise Varys in his heart. Knock knock knock. Come in. Lord Robb, has the octopus spider left? You must not believe what he said. I have always heard in the north that he is the most liar in King's Landing. As soon as Eddard entered the door, he saw that Robb was the only one there, and seemed to be very worried that he would be deceived by Varys, so he spoke immediately. Seeing Eddard looking a little anxious, Robb, who was about to tell him about the conversation, suddenly recalled what Varys had just said about the secret agent in Winterfell. He said calmly, "It's okay. He just came to tell me some news before my father was imprisoned. Okay, come and help me reheat these dishes and prepare for dinner. I'm so hungry." Okay, the brothers outside are also very hungry. "Lord Robb, which one should I heat up first?" Hearing that Robb didn't seem to trust Varys, Eddard nodded with relief and replied with a smile, "Heat up the leg of venison first." Robb pointed to the food on the kitchen table and asked casually, "By the way, you contacted Torrhen and the others today. How are they doing?" "They are staying in and outside the city, but Bloodwind is very impatient. Torrhen is a little worried that he will destroy the carriage and run away. You know, that carriage can't hold it at all." "Well, I know. Hey, pass me the olive oil over there." Chapter 55, Encirclement. The next morning, the Winterfell cavalrymen, who had a simple breakfast, continued to go out to look for Eryr and to inquire about some information. Eddard had gone out to buy food for the day, while Robb sat at the door of the shop, looking around and observing the situation in the Shoemaker's Square. The location of this intelligence point established by Varys was indeed very good. Sitting at the door of the shop, the 4 entrances of the Shoemaker's Square were in full view. Robb's eyes kept observing, and his mind was also busy. He kept simulating the next action plan in his mind. If Varys could agree, it would be the best and easiest plan. If he didn't agree, then Robb could only act according to the preset plan. People came and went in the Shoemaker's Square, and no one thought that at the door of an ordinary shop, someone was sitting here planning to break into the Red Castle and the Black Prison. Snap, snap. 2 gold-robed men wearing black ringmail passed by the door of the shop. After glancing at Robb, who was smiling and respectful, bowing his head to greet him, they arrogantly did not return the greeting, but continued to patrol forward with a blank expression. The sun slowly moved from the east to the middle of the sky. Eddard had already bought the food and returned. The Winterfell cavalrymen, who had been told by Robb to come back on time for dinner, also returned one after another. Strength lies in numbers. A dozen people, you take the vegetables, I take the bread, and he takes the meat. In 2 seconds, the prepared meals were brought to the long table of the shop. Snap, snap. Just as they were preparing to enjoy lunch, 2 gold cloaks patrolled to the door of Robb's shop again. They glanced at the people who were eating inside, and one of the gold cloaks forced a smile at the corner of his mouth, and continued to patrol forward. Click. Seeing that smile just now, Robb's heart jumped, making him start to be a little alert. When did the gold cloaks become so friendly to civilians? He patted Eddard's shoulder beside him, got up and walked towards the door of the shop. Standing at the door, Robb looked around and saw that in the Shoemaker's Square, there were a few merchants bargaining with their goods under the leather ceiling. "Ed, tell everyone to hold their weapons." Seeing the scene outside, Robb turned to Ed with a very serious expression and whispered. Ed did not ask any more questions and directly passed on his order. Clang. Weapons can be carried in King's Landing, but Robb and his men disguised themselves as a small caravan, so naturally they could not have family armor. So they all wore soft leather armor that was common in the north, and had basically no protective power. A dozen cavalrymen in the shop were holding sharp weapons and staring at the door fiercely. There were no passers-by at the door at this moment, otherwise they would definitely be scared by this scene. "Lord Robb, why are you so nervous? I don't see anything unusual outside." A cavalryman holding a long sword and approaching the door saw Robb's serious expression and couldn't help asking. "The gold cloaks we met these 2 days basically didn't bother to look at us." The 2 gold cloaks just now had abnormal expressions. "It's very likely that they came to check our numbers." Hearing his cavalry asking, Robb explained to them, while observing the situation outside the store. Although it is lunchtime now, the merchants in the canopy stalls in the square basically bring their own dry food. There are fewer and fewer people in the stalls in the square. Where are they? Are they not doing business? If I'm not mistaken, the other party is afraid that there will be too many people in the market and we will escape in the chaos. Now they are evacuating the crowd. Looking at the fewer and fewer merchants in the Shoemaker's Square, Robb said quickly, "No, we are too passive if we continue like this. Now follow me, and remember not to fight. We will break through the gate of the gods in the northwest. After leaving the city gate, we will go to the inn outside the city to meet up with Torrhen and others." "Yes." Hearing Robb's quick order, the Winterfell cavalry in the store responded in a low voice. Clang. Robb drew his long sword, went out and rushed straight to the corner of the alley on the left. He had just rushed to the front of the alley when two gold-robed men, one on the left and one on the right, suddenly rushed out from the corner of the alley. The long swords in their hands were raised from bottom to top. The two long swords rushed towards Robb's feet, and it seemed that they were going to destroy his ability to move first. Clang. When he saw the two gold-robed men, Robb, who had been alert all the time, reacted very quickly. He held the long sword tightly in his right hand and stood it upright in front of his legs. He easily blocked the two long swords by himself. Bang. After his long sword blocked the sudden attack of the two gold-robed men, Robb quickly raised his right foot and stepped on the two long swords in front of his legs. The two gold-robed men reacted and immediately wanted to draw out their long swords. But even with all their strength, the long swords did not move at all, as if they were firmly attached to Robb's right foot. Eddard and the cavalry behind Robb were not dead men. Taking this opportunity, they immediately stepped forward and stabbed the two long swords into the necks of the two gold-robed men. Crack, crack. The two gold robes, choked with blood, struggled a few times before dying, and then fell to the ground. After getting rid of the two enemies, Robb continued to turn the corner of the alley. Fuck. As soon as he turned the corner, Robb, who always kept his own way of speaking, subconsciously cursed in Chinese. In this narrow and crowded staircase alley, the densely packed gold robes were rushing towards Robb and others with swords. As soon as he finished cursing in Chinese, the long swords of three gold robes slashed at him at the same time. This time, they did not slash at Robb's legs, but came straight to his head from different directions. Robb suddenly bent down and lowered his head to avoid the three long swords, and the long sword in his hand faced the legs of the gold robes, and it was a semicircular slash from right to left. Under Robb's brute force, the long sword in his hand chopped off the 5 calves of the 3 gold robes alive. 2 of them fell to the ground, rolling and screaming. The one on the far left, who was standing on one leg because Robb's long sword could not reach him, stood there blankly, looking at his one leg, as if he had not yet reacted. Swish. Robb had no time to listen to his screams. He just stood up and thrust his sword into the right eye of the golden robe. The golden robe wave would not stop because of the 2 fallen comrades. The 4 golden robes who followed closely behind stepped on the 2 comrades who were still screaming and continued to attack Robb. Clang, clang, clang. Eddard, who had just walked around the corner, and the other 2 frontline Winterfell cavalry saw the golden robes attacking and immediately went up to fight with them. Robb, who dodged the opponent's attack, just pulled his long sword out of the neck of a golden robe. He saw on his left that the Winterfell cavalryman who had asked him about this in the shop before was exhausted after slashing down several gold cloaks. Another gold cloak who came up from behind pierced his stomach, and his internal organs fell out as the other party drew out his sword. After the brave Winterfell cavalryman fell to the ground, another cavalryman behind him immediately took his place. Fortunately, this staircase alley can allow at most 4 warriors to stand in a row. If it was on a wide street, Robb and others would have been surrounded. This won't work. Ed, you lead the others to hold on for a while. Yes. Robb chopped down another gold cloak, yelled at Ed beside him, and retreated to leave the battle. As soon as he left, a Winterfell cavalryman standing behind him immediately took up the fight. The cavalryman behind him who did not participate in the battle saw Robb coming and immediately made way for him. Robb hurried back to his shop and looked towards the shoemaker's square. At the other 3 entrances of the square, there was a mixed team of about 40 people, composed of gold cloaks and Lannister soldiers, evacuating the crowd in the shoemaker square and constantly gathering in the direction of Robb. They were surrounded. Thanks to the old driver of Akin Mountain Eye for voting for the monthly ticket, and thanks to all readers for voting and reading. P.S. This week's strong recommendation. Please help vote and support, and add more chapters after the new book period. Thank you everyone. Chapter 56 Breakout. The Shoemaker Square in King's Landing is a bustling market square. In addition to the shops of all sizes on the street, there are many scattered merchants in the middle of the square, doing business in the leather ceiling stalls. The main business here is fur goods. Therefore, the large and small caravans that transport goods back from the north through the King's Road must be distributed here. There are 4 entrances to the entire Shoemaker Square, namely the northwest staircase alley entrance near the Gate of the Gods, the gravel street leading to the Old City Gate, and the Hill of Reen is in the northeast. The southwest is near the intersection of Steel Street and Lion Gate, and the Blueston Street leading to the Great Sept of Bela in the southeast. At this time, Eddard and the cavalry of Winterfell were fighting fiercely with the Gold Cloaks who blocked the staircase alley. At the other 3 entrances, a mixed team of about 40 people was constantly clearing the crowd and approaching this direction. Robb's eyes kept scanning the Shoemaker Square, looking for a possible breakthrough point. Is it time to use a killer? After searching for a circle without results, Robb hesitated. On the second day, after arriving in King's Landing, he encountered this sudden siege, which completely disrupted his plan. If he used the trump card in advance, it would be difficult to realize the plan to rescue his father Eddard. Secret door. Suddenly, Robb remembered the secret door that Varys left, and immediately turned into the kitchen of the shop, moved the wooden cabinet, and opened the secret door. A few minutes later, Robb walked out of the secret door with an ugly face. This secret door can only reach an unused residence behind the shop. For the Gold Cloaks and Lannister soldiers who are bound to turn this siege upside down, hiding here is just to delay the time of being discovered, only forced to break through. Robb, who has no choice, bit his lower lip and made a decisive decision in his heart. But the breakout cannot be blind. The person who commanded this siege anticipated that they wanted to escape from the northwest Gate of the Gods, so he arranged a lot of Gold Cloaks here in advance. To the southeast is the Blueston Street leading to the direction of Bela Cathedral. The street is wide and easy to walk, with a good view. But because of this, in this direction, we only need to ambush a team of archers in the dark, and wait for Robb and his men to fall into the trap. Then, there are only 2 directions left, southwest and northeast. After a moment of hesitation, Robb was about to turn around and run towards the stairway, but as soon as he raised one leg, it stopped in the air. How did these enemies know we were here? Because he had just rushed to meet the enemy, Robb had not had time to think about the problem, but now he suddenly realized it. Only Ramsay, Sam, Varys, and the people who came to the shop in King's Landing knew about this place. If the first 3 leaked the secret, they would have been caught directly at the city gate. Therefore, what Varys warned him was true. There is a spy among them. However, if the spy is among them, he could have attacked from behind and controlled me when fighting the enemy just now, so that others would be afraid to act rashly. In this way, he, the spy, must have been the first to contribute to this siege. But he did not do so. Then, this means that the spy knows that I can't escape today, and his identity is still valuable. He doesn't want to expose himself, and wants to go back to Winterfell to continue to obtain intelligence. However, he survived from King's Landing alone, and he is too conspicuous. If it were me, among the group of people today, except for me, I would definitely let a few people escape alive. In this case, I might as well use the trick against them. Let the other brothers who are loyal to me live as many as possible. Brothers, listen to me. We have been surrounded by Gold Cloaks and Lannister soldiers. Now let me tell you how to break out. Time is limited, and Robb didn't think about it anymore. He roughly thought of a plan in his mind, and rushed to the corner of the staircase alley in a few steps, and told the Winterfell cavalry who did not participate in the battle about the breakout plan. In the Shoemaker Square, 3 teams of 40 mixed encirclement teams, from 3 directions, bypassed the canopy stalls one by one, and were very close to the staircase alley, where Robb and his team were. As long as they complete the encirclement, then Robb and his team will really be unable to escape. Suddenly, a large cloud of smoke rose from the stairway. The soldiers of the encirclement teams in 3 directions looked at each other, and hurriedly quickened their pace. Protect the adults to break through. Hurry, hurry up. The 3 Winterfell cavalrymen who were blocking the Gold Cloaks in the stairway suddenly slashed with their swords desperately, exchanging injuries crazily, and shouted loudly at the same time. The Gold Cloaks on the opposite side were obviously frightened by their crazy behavior, and subconsciously stepped back 2 steps, to temporarily avoid their sharp edge. The other 9 cavalrymen who used the flint they carried with them to set fire joined Eddard, who retreated from the stairway, escorting the center of their team, the adult wearing the clothes of the caravan leader and a hood, to break through to the northeast street. At this time, the scene at the intersection of the stairway was very chaotic. The gold cloaks in the front row avoided, and the 3 Winterfell cavalrymen were crazy before their death, while the gold cloaks in the back who could not see the situation kept crowding forward. Most of the shops in the Shoemaker Square sell fur goods. The fire set by the cavalrymen, before they left, spread very quickly. When the fur goods burned, they released a lot of smoke. For a while, the alleys were filled with thick smoke, blocking everyone's vision. The 11-man team of Eddard who broke through the siege had just walked more than 10 meters when they encountered the encirclement team coming quickly from the northeast. For a while, they fought hand to hand and blood splattered. This encirclement team of nearly 40 people was several times the number of Eddard and his men. But the momentum of both sides was completely different. The cavalrymen of Winterfell were all excited, as if their eyes were bloodshot, and they rushed forward without any defense. Even if they were hit by several swords and had only one breath left, they would desperately hold on to an enemy so that their comrades behind them could finish off the enemy. The Lannister soldiers in the encirclement team were better. They were all elite warriors of the Angry Lion family. Even if their morale was low, they would not be scared by them. The gold-cloaked soldiers who usually bully the weak and fear the strong bully civilians and catch vagrants and thieves in the market have never seen such a desperate posture. When several brave soldiers in front fell to the ground with bright red blood, these slick gold-cloaked soldiers hid in the shops on both sides. In the middle of the road, only the Lannister soldiers were fighting with the Winterfell cavalry. Humans are very strange. At the beginning, the soldiers of the encirclement team and the Winterfell cavalry fought back and forth. Although they lost several teammates, several people also fell on the Winterfell side. However, when the gold-cloaked soldiers retreated to the shops next to them, strange thoughts suddenly arose in the hearts of the Lannister soldiers. If you don't fight hard, why should we fight hard? The morale of this encirclement team collapsed instantly. Eddard's team, which only had 7 people left, used this crazy and desperate force to break through this encirclement team. In the narrow stair alley, corpses, blood, and thick smoke were mixed together. The 3 brave Winterfell cavalrymen who were left behind gradually lost their courage. They had countless sword wounds of varying sizes, and their soft leather armor was stained with blood. Hey, Bia, you still owe me 2 silver, dear. Hey, remember to pay me back in your next life. A Winterfell cavalryman whose original appearance could no longer be seen was choked by the smoke behind him and kept coughing. He squeezed out the last bit of strength in his body, cut down a golden robe, and said to his comrade beside him in a hoarse voice, "Swish." His comrade beside him could not hear his words at all, because a long sword pierced through his comrade's mouth and went straight through the back of his head. Without hearing his comrade's answer, the Winterfell cavalryman turned around and saw that the golden robe was pulling the long sword out of his head. He barely pulled out a slight arc at the corner of his mouth and laughed and cursed in a low voice. "Hey, bastard, it seems that you are definitely going to default on this account." Swish. The golden-robed man who came up from the back easily tore the cavalryman's throat with a sword, and hot blood spurted out. Thanks to Zinwan Yizi and Kyan Ziran for their coins, and to Tingming Nayanfan for his monthly vote. Thanks to all readers for voting and following. P.S. The answer to the recent plot questions will be at the end of the next chapter. Chapter 57. Difficult to escape. Hey, Phils, you guys, organize the civilians to put out the fire here. The others, follow me. After the gold robes dealt with the enemies in the staircase alley, their captain coughed and quickly explained a few words, then led the team to chase after Red's team that had broken through. Hey, ugh. What a bastard. He let us go first just now to die, but now he's rushing to the front to grab the credit. Phils, who led 7 gold robes to put out the fire, spat in the direction where the captain left and cursed loudly. Hey, cough. Hurry up and call these civilians hiding in the room to put out the fire, otherwise, the fire will not be controlled soon, and they will all die. Phils cursed a few times, but coughed a few times because of the thick smoke, and then gave instructions to his team members. Looking at the gold robe team members who left, Phils, who was choked by the thick smoke and kept coughing, suddenly had an idea and sat on a corpse. The thick smoke floated over his head, and it was not so choking after sitting down. Tap, tap, tap. A burst of dense footsteps came, and Fields looked up and saw that it was the other two encirclement teams that had arrived. Those criminals broke out from this direction. Seeing some familiar faces in the encirclement team, Fields quickly pointed to the direction where the captain left and shouted, "Hurry up and grab the credit. Don't let that damn captain grab the first credit." Looking at the soldiers of the encirclement team who passed by him quickly, he secretly blessed them in his heart. When the encirclement team disappeared into the northeast street, and the soldiers of his own team had not returned, Fields, who had nothing to do, suddenly set his sights on the corpse on the ground. If he couldn't grab the credit, then see if he could make a little money. He did it as soon as he thought of it. He quickly bent down and groped for the corpse on the ground, whether it was a silver deer or a copper coin, and whether it was stained with blood. Fields hid it directly in his sleeves and boots. Looking at the corner of the alley, a corpse with a bloody face leaning against the wall, Fields' eyes lit up. Although the corpse was wearing worn-out soft leather armor, he, who had been in King's Landing for many years, could see the valuable lining inside the corpse's leather armor at a glance. "I've made a fortune." This thought flashed through Firth's mind, and he immediately stopped searching and stepped in front of the corpse. Just as he was about to reach out and grope, the eyes of the corpse suddenly opened. Robb, who was disguised as a corpse, stretched out his hands and grabbed the neck of the golden robe. The huge power of his hands made it difficult for the golden robe to cry for help. The golden robe held Robb's wrists and tried to break free. However, Robb's hands were like a pair of steel pliers, clamping his neck tightly, motionless. Gradually, Firth's whole face turned purple and blue, his two eyeballs were covered with bloodshot and bulged out of the eye sockets like a big-eyed goldfish. Bang! When Firth's life signs disappeared, Robb loosened his hands, threw his body aside, and quickly stood up. He stared at the three Winterfell cavalrymen who volunteered to stay behind, and saw their bodies being trampled to pieces. Robb bit his lip hard, pulled out his long sword from the waist of his golden robe on the ground, turned around and ran in the southwest direction opposite to Eddard's team. Using Eddard and others as bait, he led the enemy to the northeast exit. Using fire, smoke and other distractions, Robb pretended to be a corpse and waited for an opportunity to break out in the southwest Steel Street direction, where he had been before and was more familiar. If it was really as he expected, the spies in Eddard's team did not want to be exposed, then they should be able to survive. Is Robb's plan cruel? From the memory of the previous life, it was quite cruel. If Eddard's team did not have spies, it would be difficult for them to survive with so many pursuers. Let others be bait and escape by yourself. I believe that, if the keyboard warriors in the previous life knew about it, they would definitely stand on the moral high ground and criticize it. But in this world, these Winterfell cavalrymen had no objection to this plan. Knowing that they would die, they bravely and fearlessly broke through the siege, creating a false impression to attract all the enemies. Of course, Robb would never let them die in vain, and would take good care of their survivors. As Robb expected, the enemy's attention was attracted by Eddard's team, and there was no trace of the gold cloaks and Lannister soldiers on the Shoemaker's Square. He leaned against the shops and street debris to hide his figure, and moved towards the southwest Steel Street. On a street, 20 elite Lannister soldiers were silently lined up and waiting for something. Looking at the smoke rising from the Shoemaker's Square, listening to the shouts and screams coming from afar, the commander of the gold cloaks standing next to them, Janos Slynt, swallowed nervously. Feeling a little worried, he turned to Jaime Lannister, who was whistling leisurely, holding a small dagger in his right hand, and shaving his left fingernails, and asked, "Lord Jaime, are we just waiting here? Why did I ask you to transfer most of your gold cloaks to the direction of the Gate of the Gods? Because these barbarians in the north will definitely want to return to the snowy wasteland from the Gate of the Gods as soon as possible. If all goes well, and the encirclement is completed, they will be brought to us soon." Hearing Janos's question, Jaime stopped whistling, squinted at the timid commander, and replied with a smile. Hearing this, Janos subconsciously said, "What if it doesn't go well? That's why we've been waiting here. I believe that wolf cub won't be caught so easily." However, with our arrangement, they will definitely not be able to escape today. In fact, ever since I saw him slash a sword in Winterfell last time, I've been looking forward to it and want to try his swordsmanship myself. Jaime answered Jenna's question, and at the end, he had an eager look. No wonder Lord Jaime insisted on guarding here in person. But, they may also break through other exits, right? After listening to him, Janice nodded thoughtfully. They definitely can't get through the gate of the gods, and that wolf cub can't be so stupid as to go in the direction of the cathedral full of archers. So, with a probability of 1 in 2, my luck is never bad. Jaime was quite confident in his analysis, and he answered Jenna's question with a smile. Suddenly, a figure appeared in his mind, and he stopped smiling and whispered, "If they choose the other side, then, we should think about how to explain to Her Majesty the Queen why the wolf cub turned into mincemeat." Kill. Janice, who was about to continue talking, suddenly heard shouts of killing from the front, and he looked forward nervously. Hearing the shouts of killing getting closer and closer, Jaime put away the dagger in his right hand, stood up straight, and said with a smile, "It seems that I bet right again." Robb, who was about to escape the encirclement by passing the next street, stopped his feet as soon as he ran past the corner of the street. Due to the effect of inertia, he ran forward a few steps before he could stand firm. Looking at the battle formation at the street intersection, he shook his head helplessly and said to the person who blocked his way, "You will definitely not let me pass, right? P.S. I will not open a separate chapter, but here to answer the questions about the plot raised by readers in the past 2 days. 1. Robb did not go to King's Landing on a whim. Since Robb was plotted against by the three-eyed raven, he was unable to stop Eddard from following Robert southward, and could only start to count the time and plan how to rescue him before he was beheaded by Joffrey too. Some people questioned why they did not send people to guard against it, or tell Eddard to let him escape from King's Landing earlier. Please think about it. With Eddard's stubborn temper, even if he knew Cersei's conspiracy, he would not return to the north alone, and would still find a way to let Robert's legitimate heir ascend the Iron Throne. And his honor-conscious and kind character would definitely not be able to deal with Cersei and the others, and the result was similar in the end. 3. Robb should have organized his military in the north, and marched to the border, or abandoned Eddard and just inherited the north. If he organized his military in the north, how could he save Eddard? In the original drama, Robb defeated Jaime's army and captured him alive, but Eddard was still beheaded by King Joffrey. How could he march to the border, defeat Tywin in a short time? This is even more unreasonable than going to King's Landing to rescue. Then, Robb is the fusion of two souls, and Eddard is at least half of his father. Just abandoning Eddard and letting a person with the most honor die again with the unwarranted charge of treason. Regardless of other reasons, everyone will feel uneasy. Finally, in the world of Game of Thrones, even the protagonist will not have a smooth journey. His rescue operation was disrupted as soon as he arrived in King's Landing. This was calculated by some forces, and I will not spoil it here. Please rest assured that I will not force you to be stupid. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 58. Jaime frowned and stared at the Winterfell cavalrymen who were surrounded by layers of golden robes and Lannister soldiers in the street. Seeing that there was no hope of breaking out, Eddard and 5 Winterfell cavalrymen held swords to protect the adult in the middle of them, who was wearing the clothes of the caravan leader and wearing a hood. Something is wrong. The young wolf is not a character who will be protected. This thought flashed through his mind. With a clang, Jaime drew his long sword from his waist and walked towards the Winterfell cavalrymen, shouting at the same time, "Get out of my way." Hearing this, the soldiers in front of him quickly moved left and right to make way for him to go straight to the inside of the encirclement. "Robb Stark, I wanted to learn swordsmanship from you last time, but was interrupted by that bastard. Come out now, otherwise, they will all die miserably." Coming to the inside of the encirclement, Jaime raised his long sword in his right hand, pointed at the hooded man, and said loudly, A Winterfell cavalryman who knew he would die today could not help but want to give this famous Kingslayer of the Seven Kingdoms a try. He put his sword on his waist, rushed to Jaime, and stabbed him swiftly and powerfully. Jaime's right hand with a smile quickly drew a semicircle from top to bottom counterclockwise, easily swinging the Winterfell cavalryman's sword away. Then, he turned his wrist holding the sword, and the sword in his hand smoothly pushed forward, and then drew a semicircle clockwise to retract it. Clang, crash. The Winterfell cavalryman's sword fell powerlessly. He slowly lowered his head to look at his cut abdomen, and saw blood and organs flowing all over the ground. Then he closed his eyes, and fell heavily to the ground. The remaining 4 cavalrymen looked at each other, and rushed towards Jaime with swords, wanting to surround and attack, and fight with more people. Seeing the Winterfell cavalry attacking together, Jaime, who had not fought in King's Landing for a long time, showed excitement on his face, and he went straight to meet them with his sword. The 4 cavalrymen who were charging head-on were in different positions, so at the same time, only the 2 cavalrymen in front could attack Jaime, and their attacking movements were all seen by Jaime. He easily dodged a long sword chop, and his left hand, wearing a leather glove, quickly attacked and grabbed the right hand of the cavalryman on the left, who was holding the sword. Seeing that the attack of a cavalryman on the right was coming, he raised his left hand with force, and used the long sword of the cavalryman on the left to block the attack. At the same time, Jaime's right long sword was raised horizontally to his left ear, and a swift horizontal chop from left to right passed through the eyes of the cavalryman whose wrist was grabbed, and the neck of the cavalryman on the right side, and screams sounded immediately, and blood flowed down. Looking behind the 2 cavalrymen, Jaime pushed the blind cavalryman on his left hand back with force, and hit a cavalryman behind him. He blocked with his right long sword, stepped over the corpse of the cavalryman on the right, and attacked with the long sword of another cavalryman who had just pushed his blind companion aside. At the same time, Jaime took out the small dagger from his waist with his left hand, threw it hard, and accurately stabbed it into the eyes of the cavalryman who had just pushed his blind companion to the side. He killed the last cavalryman with intact combat power with 2 swords, and then killed the blind cavalryman who was screaming with 1 sword. Jaime stood in the pile of corpses covered with blood and organs and exhaled heavily. From beginning to end, this 1-on-4 battle took less than a minute. Jaime's entire killing process was smooth and flowing, showing his powerful personal swordsmanship. Eddard and the hooded man next to him were stunned in place. The battle ended too quickly, and the 2 of them had no chance to step forward to help fight. The hooded man seemed to think that there was no need to continue pretending, and tore off his hood. He was the last Winterfell cavalryman in King's Landing at the moment. TSK, TSK, TSK. It seems that I can only go back and explain to Her Majesty the Queen why the wolf cub has turned into mincemeat. Seeing that the hooded man was not Robb as he expected, Jaime shook his head in disappointment. Snap. After saying that, he wiped the blood on the long sword on the corpse on the ground, and then inserted the long sword into the scabbard at his waist again. Then he pointed at the last cavalryman, and ordered the soldiers around him, "Kill him. I want the other one alive." A burly man nearly 8 feet, about 2.66 meters, tall stood in the center of the street. The sunlight blocked by him cast a large shadow on the ground, just like the shadow he cast in the hearts of his victims with his huge size and brutality. Sir Gregor Clegane, nicknamed the Mountain. At this moment, he was wearing an extremely heavy black armor. Through the gap, it can be seen that he was wearing a chainmail made of iron rings and interlocking rings. His shoulders, elbows, knees and other joints were protected by the innermost hard leather armor. He wore a flat-topped huge helmet on his head, leaving only a breathing hole for his mouth and nose, and a narrow hole for observation at the position of his eyes. The decoration of the flat-topped huge helmet was a stone fist pointing directly to the sky. It can be said that the protection of the Mountain's armor has reached the extreme. If ordinary people put on his armor, they will be directly crushed by the weight of the armor, not to mention that he also holds a sword and shield in each hand. In his right hand, a 6 foot, about 2 meter, long two-handed giant sword was held on the ground with one hand, and in his left hand, a thick oak shield was worn, on which the family emblem of 3 black dogs was painted. Hearing Robb's question, the Mountain did not answer, but said to the soldiers behind him in a low voice without turning his head, "Everyone retreat. He is mine. Who dares to interfere, die." Robb started to use words to delay time, and his eyes have been carefully observing the surrounding situation. Yesterday, Robb and his companions walked back and forth from this intersection twice, because they were looking for Angier's blacksmith shop. However, because they were busy at the time, they just passed by in a hurry, and did not observe in detail. This is an intersection southwest of the Shoemaker Square. Compared with the staircase alley, this place is undoubtedly much wider, which is conducive to hiding and escaping. There are also many canopy stalls around this wide intersection. The goods on the stalls are still there. It seems that the stall owners were forcibly driven away. On the wall on the right side of the intersection is written the road to the Lion Gate, and on the left side of the intersection is the road to the Alchemist Guild. In front is the Iron Street that Robb visited yesterday. At this time, the Mountain, who was standing in the center of the intersection, opened his mouth, and the 20 Lannister soldiers behind him immediately retreated in panic, leaving them room for battle. Ta 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 ta. Hearing the movement of the soldiers behind him, the Mountain did not say much nonsense to Robb. He turned his right wrist, picked up the two-handed giant sword with one hand, and walked towards Robb with heavy steps and strides. The Mountain, who was tall and long-legged, took one big step, which was equivalent to 2 or 3 steps for an ordinary person. In the blink of an eye, he came in front of Robb, raised his right hand, and chopped down hard with the two-handed giant sword. Whoosh! The heavy two-handed giant sword, under his great power, actually made a low sound of breaking through the air. Chapter 59 The Magic Mountain. Facing this famous heavy armored warrior from the Seven Kingdoms, Robb was of course very alert. When the Mountain made a downward slashing motion, he had already moved his feet to the right and dodged the attack of the giant sword by leaning his body to the side. Boom. The two-handed giant sword in the Mountain's right hand slashed heavily on the gravel road surface, immediately smashing a small pit in the ground, and the small stones that were smashed flew everywhere. Clang. Dodging the attack, Robb, who leaned his body to the side, cut into the left side of the Mountain's body and slashed down with the long sword in his hand, hitting the Mountain's left leg armor heavily, making a metallic collision sound. Robb's long sword slashing down did not break through the Mountain's armor defense, but with his current strength, this sword directly hit the Mountain's left leg weak, making him bend down and kneel down. Bang! The Mountain was very experienced in combat. While his left leg was attacked by Robb, he directly swung his left hand outward with force. The thick oak shield hit Robb's chest directly, and the huge force knocked him out. Crash. Robb, who was knocked flying, crashed into a ceiling stall on the street. His weight and the impact force instantly collapsed the stall, and the furs on the stall fell all over the floor. Although his left leg was almost knocked to the ground by the blow, the strong Mountain did not show mercy. He endured the pain in his left foot, and continued to chase Robb with his sword, who fell on the ceiling stall. Crack. He chopped the stall with a skillful giant sword, and the stall, that had already collapsed, was directly cut into 2 pieces by the Mountain's sword. But there was no Robb under the broken stall. A cloak made of animal fur was thrown out from the broken left stall, blocking the Mountain's vision. Squeak. The Mountain's two-handed giant sword, which had chopped the stall, suddenly lifted up, and the cloak was directly cut into 2. But taking advantage of this opportunity, Robb, with blood on his mouth, stepped forward again, and slashed at his left leg with the long sword in his hand. Clang. Snap. There was still a clear sound, and the long sword did not cut through the armor, but was hit by Robb's strength again. This time, the Mountain's left leg softened, and the leg armor collided with the ground, and he knelt on one knee. Learning from the experience just now, Robb immediately rolled to the intersection in front of him after the sword slashed, avoiding the heavy blow of the Mountain's oak shield. Ah! The Mountain, who was kneeling on one knee, seemed to be angered by this posture, and suddenly roared to the sky. Then, he stood up quickly, as if he had exploded, chasing Robb, and slashed with a sword full of power. Robb rolled to avoid it at this time, looking very embarrassed, but seeing that the Mountain was indeed as easily angered as he thought, he was more happy in his heart. Because of his deliberate adjustment of position just now, Robb was now facing the Mountain, with his back to the Lannister soldiers at the intersection. The two chased and chopped on the street, and countless canopy stalls were split in 2 by the Mountain. Ordinary people holding two-handed giant swords might have their hands sore after a few swings, but the Mountain did not seem to have any intention of exhausting their strength. Under Robb's deliberate guidance, the two's battle had already reached the intersection. The surrounding Lannister soldiers, fearing that the mountain would accidentally cut them in two, dodged to the side. After slashing with all his strength for a while, the mountain, who was already panting heavily, suddenly cut the leather buckle of his left oak shield, and then threw the oak shield at Robb with his left hand, and at the same time, he strode forward. Ding. Robb had just dodged the oak shield and let it hit the ground behind him. After throwing away the oak shield, the mountain, whose speed had increased significantly, had already arrived in front of him. His right hand, as thick as a tree trunk, held the huge sword, and chopped directly at Robb's head. This time, Robb had no choice but to raise his sword with both hands to resist. Clang! The two long swords collided with a crisp sound. Since his strength increased greatly, Robb, who was used to suppressing others with force, finally felt the power of the weaker party this time. His hands were numb and sore from the shock, and he almost couldn't hold the long sword in his hands. Because of the pressure of this huge force, the long sword in Robb's hand was pressed close to his head. In the end, he had to take the posture of kneeling on one knee on his left leg to barely block it. After kneeling once, the mountain regained his ground. The two-handed giant sword in his right hand was blocked by Robb, and the mountain's left hand, without the oak shield, clenched his fist and punched Robb's head. Robb saw his left fist attack from the corner of his eye, and he squeezed all his strength to push the giant sword up, and his body rushed forward. Clang! The mountain's huge sword hit the ground, and Robb was able to dodge the left fist by rolling along the ground because of his tall and sturdy figure. His huge sword was 6 feet long, and the attack range was very wide, but it was difficult to quickly retract it and attack Robb again. Robb rushed forward and came behind the mountain, rolled around, and barely stood up in a half squat. He immediately turned around and stabbed the mountain's left leg. Swish. This stab was different from the chop, and the hard leather armor at the leg was much less offensive than the armor. Although the long sword was blocked by the hard leather armor and could not stab very deep, it finally made the monster-like mountain bleed. Ding. The left leg, which had been hit twice in a row, was stabbed again by Robb. The mountain's tall and sturdy body could not support it with just his right foot. The huge sword in his right hand fell to the ground, and the whole person fell to his knees with his legs and hands on the ground. Kill him. The mountain didn't care about what he was going to say. He knelt on the ground, clenched his fists, and waved at Robb, while roaring. On the left and right sides of the place, where Robb and his men were fighting, there was a Lannister soldier standing. After hearing the mountain's order, they immediately rushed towards Robb with swords. Robb pulled out the long sword from the crook of the mountain's left leg, stood up, and just dodged the mountain's waving fists. The soldier on the right had already come to his side. Robb held the sword in his right hand and first blocked the long sword stabbed by the soldier on the right. Then he turned around and punched the soldier's unprotected face with his left hand. Bang! Rip! The Lannister soldier was hit by Robb's powerful punch. His face was covered with blood, and he fell to the ground. The soldier on the left took the opportunity to cut his back with a sword, leaving a long bloody mark. At this time, Robb's hands were numb and his physical strength was exhausted. He had no time to deal with the soldier on the left. He raised the long sword in his right hand and stabbed the head of the soldier on the right, who was smashed to the ground. Blood flowed out from the soldier's body, and a small stream of red mist accompanied the blood, overflowed from his body, soared into the air, and sank into Robb's body. His body regained some physical strength due to the input of this small stream of red mist. Robb, who had recovered his condition, was not able to deal with the soldier on the left at all. Robb turned around and killed him with two swords. Since Robb had been fighting towards the intersection of Steel Street, there were no Lannister soldiers behind him at this time. The battle just now was very short, and they were running towards Robb with swords. Robb certainly would not wait for them foolishly, and he had no time to pry open the heavy iron can of the mountain. He turned around and ran towards the intersection, in the direction of Steel Street. Catch him now. If you can't catch him, you will all die. Seeing Robb escape from his sight, the furious mountain roared at the pursuing Lannister soldiers. Thanks to Nangang Yi and Mihaoshu for voting for the monthly ticket. Thanks to all readers for voting and reading. Chapter 60 Gendry. On the streets of Steel Street, a dozen Lannister soldiers were chasing the figure in front of them, which was getting farther and farther away. A woman who was knocked down by them, because she couldn't dodge in time, could do nothing but scream. In this era, civilians could get killed by just a curse. The men on the street hid aside with interest, watching them catch people with relish. No one thought of helping the woman who fell to the ground. Robb looked very embarrassed at this time. The blood at the corner of his mouth solidified a little. The hideous sword wound on his back was stopped by the red mist contributed by the last Lannister soldier with his life. Without the continuous input of red mist, coupled with the blood loss from the previous injury, his physical strength has been gradually consumed. Master Anger's blacksmith shop had just been run away before he got rid of the pursuers who were following closely behind him. Even if he wanted to seek Varys' help through Master Anger, it would be impossible. Although Robb remembered the topography of King's Landing very well through the maps of this era were not the 3D maps of the previous life. The street he was running on was completely unfamiliar to him. However, looking at the many blacksmith shops around him, and comparing the general location in his mind, he should be near the middle and lower section of Steel Street near Visenya Hill. Finally, he saw a ceiling stall built at a narrow intersection. While running past, he chopped down its 2 wooden pillars with his long sword. Snap! The ceiling collapsed to the ground without support, blocking the not-so-wide street. The Lannister soldiers behind him had to stop cursing and chop open the ceiling that was in the way with their long swords. While everyone's eyes were attracted by the collapsed ceiling, Robb dodged into an empty alley. In the alley full of debris, excrement, and clothless lines, Robb pulled off a robe that someone had hung out to dry. While taking off his blood-stained soft leather armor and changing clothes, he walked along the alley, turning left and right, trying his best to get rid of the pursuers behind him. When he passed through the alley and came to the main street again, his image was not as eye-catching as before. Many carriages were moving back and forth on this street, a scene of prosperity. Robb thought quickly in his mind, and then looked around. He quickly threw the crumpled blood-stained leather armor into the cargo box of a carriage heading towards the mud gate. Then he opened the curtain of the cargo box of another carriage that was just going in the opposite direction, and flashed into it. The cargo box of this carriage was loaded with various iron and copper materials. Robb, who had been fleeing for a long time with injuries, casually slumped on a piece of iron material and took a deep breath to rest. The carriage swayed for a short time before it slowly stopped with a thick male voice whoosh. Robb, who had been alert all the time, immediately opened the curtain and observed the situation around him. This is a narrow alley with no one in it. Next to the carriage is the back door of a blacksmith shop. The door is open at the moment. Robb turned over and got off the carriage and dodged inside. Inside the blacksmith shop, a black-haired boy who was about to go out to move goods stood there, staring blankly at Robb, who rushed in with a sword. Robb had never expected that he would meet a boy of the same age as him. As soon as he came in, Robb tightened the long sword in his hand, and a thought of killing someone to silence him arose in his mind. No, have I been influenced by this world without knowing it? Being seen by a boy, he actually wanted to kill someone to silence him. Robb's mind was churning, and he suddenly woke up, relaxed his right hand holding the sword, turned around and walked out of the blacksmith shop. Hey, if you don't mind, you can hide in the warehouse on the left. I'm usually the only one who goes into the warehouse. When he was about to reach the door, the black-haired boy whispered behind him. Robb heard this, turned around, and looked carefully at the kind blue-eyed black-haired boy. He was only slightly shorter than Robb, wearing a leather waistcoat, with well-developed muscles on his hands, and many burn marks on his hands. It can be seen that he usually works very hard in the blacksmith shop. My name is Robb. I will thank you for your kindness today and the future. Since there is a place to hide and rest temporarily, Robb did not leave so pretentiously. He thanked the black-haired boy and walked to the warehouse on the left. Don't thank me, although my master will go out to deliver goods after unloading the goods today. He will be back the day after tomorrow at the latest. So, you can only stay until the morning of the day after tomorrow at the latest. The black-haired boy whispered as he walked towards the back door. Gendry, where the hell have you been? Why don't you come to unload the goods? Master Tob, I'm coming. A sturdy man's voice came from outside the back door, and the black-haired boy Gendry ran out immediately. Blacksmith shop. Gendry, King Robert's illegitimate son. Hearing the name of the black-haired boy, Robb was stunned. He compared Gendry's appearance with his impression of Robert. They looked not alike at all. It was no wonder that Robb couldn't tell. He had never seen Robert's appearance when he was young. When he saw the handsome Gendry, he didn't think about it at all. When he saw the fat-bellied king's current appearance, shaking his head, Robb, who just wanted to rest now, didn't want to think about it for the time being. He entered the warehouse of the blacksmith shop and closed the door. There were all kinds of finished weapons and farm tools piled up in the warehouse. There were also some small amounts of raw materials such as iron and copper. Robb sat on a finished armor and began to rest. At this time, although he was in a mess, he was far from the end of the road. After losing control last time, Robb's physical fitness had obviously increased. After the last 2 red mists were put into his chest, which was injured by the oak shield, it was no longer a big problem. It was just that the long sword wound on his back. Although the bleeding had stopped, a small amount of red mist was obviously not enough to promote its healing. If there were really pursuers who could track him all the way here, he would not mind turning them into red mist to restore his physical strength and sword wound. Although after today's battle, the blood contract points increased again, it was still within the controllable range. If there were really many enemies in the end, he could use the killer mace. It was just a killer mace prepared to rescue his father, and it was likely that it could only be used once, otherwise it would be difficult to do anything after the enemy was prepared. Gendry went back and forth and loaded all the raw materials from the carriage and then moved the finished armor and farm tools from the warehouse. His master drove the carriage away and he returned to the blacksmith shop and closed the back door. During this period, no Lannister pursuers came. Gendry was very careful and cleaned up the footprints near the back door of the blacksmith shop. After dealing with these, he did his daily work in the blacksmith shop. Chapter 61 Trap. About an hour later, 2 sweaty, panting gold robes came to the front door of the blacksmith shop. "Hey, boy, have you seen a northerner who is about your height and covered in blood?" One of the gold robes took a few deep breaths and asked bluntly. "I have been in the shop the whole time and have not seen anyone with blood on their bodies, sir." Gendry replied with a blank expression, but a respectful tone. "Yeah." The man in the gold robe who asked the question heard his answer, nodded, then turned to ask his companion, "Do you want to search? What are you searching for? I heard that the mountain was injured by him. It's okay if we don't find him, but if we really find him, can we defeat him with just the 2 of us? Just ask some questions. Besides, it's been so long. He didn't run away, hiding here waiting for you to catch him. He's not a fool. If I wanted to escape, I would definitely run down Steel Street to Mudgate or Fisherman's Square. There are more people and more mixed people there, and it would be easier to leave King's Landing in the chaos. Besides, the group of Lannister soldiers just sent a message saying that the bloody leather armor of the criminal was found at Mudgate. As for Steel Street, we just need to make routine inquiries and deal with it. Another man in the gold robe, who was leaning against the door of the blacksmith shop to rest, heard his companion's question and immediately made a shrewd and low-voiced reasoning and analysis. "Let's go and ask the blacksmith next door. Alas, it's our bad luck that all the hard work falls on us." "Yes." Gendry looked at the 2 gold-cloaked men and walked towards the blacksmith next door. He continued to do his apprentice work expressionlessly. After working for more than an hour, he saw that the street outside the blacksmith shop returned to normal order. Gendry stopped his work, filled a basin of water in the blacksmith shop, took a portion of the dinner that Master Tob had left for him, and walked towards the warehouse. "It's safer outside. There is water and black bread here." Gendry pushed the door of the warehouse open with his shoulder and entered it. Seeing Robb resting, he immediately opened his eyes and stared at him. He said loudly, "You can leave now, or the day after tomorrow morning. Anyway, Gendry, you are the illegitimate son of the late king, Robert Baratheon." Gendry came to Robb's side, bent down to put down the basin of water and black bread, and continued to speak. But before he could finish his words, he was interrupted by Robb's very abrupt words. Hearing this, Gendry, who was bending over, suddenly stiffened. He turned his head stiffly and looked at Robb, his eyes wide open, with an expression of disbelief. "Yes, I'm not kidding. I'm Robb Stark, the acting Lord of Winterfell." My father, Eddard Stark, should have come to see you when he was the Hand of the King. I wonder if you still remember. Robb said to Gendry with a serious face. Gendry put down the things in his hands, stood up, and answered Robb, of course I remember that recently, 2 Hands of the King came to ask me some questions. But why do you tell me this? I know your ambition is not just to be a blacksmith, and I also said that I would thank you. Now, I will tell you this, let you control your own destiny, and let you make your own choice. Stay here as a blacksmith apprentice, or wait a few days, and go back to Winterfell with me to see how far you can grow. Robb finished what he wanted to say in one breath, then picked up the basin, and drank it in big gulps. After quenching his thirst, he used the remaining clean water to wash the blood on his hands, and then tore the black bread without hesitation, to fill his stomach that was very hungry after the battle. King's bastard, this is too sudden, let me calm down. Gendry, who was a little unable to accept this information, sneered, covered his forehead, and left the warehouse after speaking. After Gendry left, Robb mechanically ate the unpalatable black bread. After he knew that the black-haired boy was Gendry, he chose to tell him the secret. First, Robb was a person who would repay a favor. He knew that Gendry had a fighting spirit and really wanted him to have a better development. Second, he didn't want Gendry's king's blood to be used by the Red Woman Melisandre to curse him. Robb was not sure whether the curse would work on him. Although he had a Bloodwind and his physique had greatly improved, he was still an ordinary person in essence. Bloodwind. Robb seemed to think of something and immediately stared at the closed door of the storeroom with dull eyes. I don't know what he was thinking in his mind. Red Castle, throne room. Joffrey was sitting on the high platform in the center of the throne room, on the iron throne covered with spikes, sharp horns and twisted metal. There were narrow stone steps under the high platform. A long carpet extended from the throne to the bronze oak door at the end of the hall. As the saying goes, when good things happen, people feel refreshed. Now Joffrey's face is ruddy, and he is full of energy. Although he was very sad when his beloved father passed away the day before yesterday, after these 2 days, when he began to master the power he had never had before, Joffrey seemed to have broken free from an invisible cage. At this moment, Cersei was sitting at the steps on the right side of Joffrey, and the Kingsguard and Lannister soldiers were standing around the throne room. Jaime, Baelish, Varys, Janis and others stood at the bottom of the steps, reporting the process and results of the roundup. The fire in Shoemaker Square has been put out, and some shops have been burned down. The Gold Cloaks are organizing civilians and starting the cleanup. Most of the criminals in the north are dead. I personally captured Eddard Stark. As for Robb Stark, he used Eddard and others as bait, injured Circle again, fled to the vicinity of Mudgate and Fisherman's Square, and disappeared without a trace. Jaime reported loudly, but he was a little embarrassed when he said that Robb escaped in the end. After all, this was a well-prepared and sure encirclement, but he didn't expect such a mistake to occur. Snap. Snap. As expected, Joffrey, who was still smiling and listening at the beginning, immediately became gloomy when he heard the last part. After Jaime finished his report, he stood up from the Iron Throne and clapped his hands slowly. You are really amazing. With hundreds of people, you surrounded a dozen traitors and let the main criminal escape. Kingslayer, the Mountain, hahaha, what's the use of you warriors who are famous in the 7 kingdoms? I should let a fat pig lead the charge, maybe it can bite Robb Stark's head back for me. You are a bunch of trash who are worse than pigs. Joffrey, who was standing on the throne, became more and more excited as he spoke, and finally couldn't help but scold Jaime and others. Joffrey, be polite, that's your uncle. Cersei, who was beside him, frowned and scolded him immediately after hearing this. Jaime, who was scolded in the audience, had a gloomy face, while others lowered their heads, as if it had nothing to do with them. Yes, mother. Lord Varys, as the chief of intelligence, I believe you will have good news, right? Seeing Joffrey nodded and sat back on the Iron Throne, Cersei turned around and asked Varys. Hearing his name, Varys immediately raised his head and smiled, and said softly, Your Majesty, Lord Jaime and his men have cleared out all the civilians near the Shoemaker Square in advance, including my little birds. The people of the Stark family seem to be good at hiding, just like the little girl of the Stark family. My little bads cannot know the whereabouts of Robb Stark for the time being. However, there is an inn outside the gate of the gods, and there are several accomplices of the traitors in it. I think we can arrange to capture them. No, that inn is a trap I used to capture Robb Stark. We can't move it now. As soon as Varys finished speaking, Jaime immediately rejected his last suggestion to capture. Trap? Lord Jaime, I heard that there is Robb Stark's direwolf in that inn. Don't. Hearing Jaime's words, Varys raised his eyebrows slightly, with a worried look on his face. Lord Varys, please rest assured. I have made some arrangements, and there will be no mistakes this time. Jaime said confidently. It can be seen that he is very sure of the trap he arranged. Thanks to the Light Chaser for 1500 points, the Wind War Song for 500 points, and the Great Priestly Llama in New Village, the Arbitration Agency, Mo Yashinju, and the Book Friend 20170121021023100888. For the monthly votes. Thanks to all readers for voting and reading. PS. Many big comments in the past 2 days should not be written like this, and I have replied to the reasons why they are written one by one. After this encirclement due to the betrayal of the spy, Robb's rhythm will be entered. Finally, I would like to say that Robb is not the king of the north at this moment, but a son who has a plan and means to rescue his father. If my son knew that I would die if he didn't rescue me, he would still wait and use my death to make a fuss. Such a son should not be born. Chapter 62 Little Bird. Okay, let's follow Jaime's plan. By the way, Joffrey, do you have anything else to say? Cersei on the podium directly confirmed Jaime's plan, then turned to her son and said. Joffrey tilted his head to look at his mother, and saw Cersei tilting her head to Jaime. He nodded, and with a reluctant tone, he said to Jaime below the stage, Uncle Jaime, after I hold the coronation ceremony, you will be my hand of the king. I'm willing to serve you. Jaime heard this, secretly glanced at Cersei, and then saluted Joffrey. The most important thing for you now is to catch Robb Stark. This damn guy, I must have another sword fight with him. Not only will I make him eat dirt, but I will also poke countless bloody holes in his body. Cough. Looking at her son who was getting more and more excited, and his face was getting more and more hideous, Cersei coughed heavily. Joffrey stopped talking immediately after hearing his mother's reminder. He adjusted his expression, and said to Baelish, who had been listening silently, Baelish, inform the Archbishop of the Great Sept of Baela to prepare for my father's funeral in the next 2 days. Then, prepare the Golden Dragon. I will hold a tournament at that time, and my coronation ceremony must be lively. Yes, your majesty. Although Joffrey had not yet been crowned, the smart Baelish still addressed him respectfully. Okay, that's it for today. My father betrayed the country, my brother fled, my beauty must be very sad, I want to take her out to relax. As soon as he finished speaking, Joffrey, with an excited face, walked out of the throne room with the hound, and walked towards Meagher's holdfast. Okay, everyone else leave. Jaime stay, I have some questions to ask you. Yes, your majesty. Varys and others all bowed and left, leaving the silent Jaime standing alone in the throne room. Lord Varys, are you really unaware of Robb Stark's whereabouts? Baelish, who had just walked out of the throne room and deliberately walked close to Varys, approached him and asked in a low voice with a smile. Of course, Lord Baelish, are you doubting my loyalty? Varys turned around and asked with a smile on his face. No, I would never think so. However, Lord Varys, it seems that you have been to the area near Shoemaker Square recently, right? Haha, Lord Baelish is really well informed. I went there to buy a fur cushion. If I sit in one place for a long time, it is inevitable that I will have some minor problems. Unlike Lord Baelish, he can walk around and look around, and only sit for a short time when he finds a good place. Haha, of course you have to walk around and look around more. If you want to sit, you have to sit in a place with a higher position and better scenery. Lord Varys, you have to be careful. If you sit in one place for too long, I'm afraid you will not be able to stand up in the future. Haha, your excellency is right. The two ministers of the kingdom exchanged with each other very friendly for a while, and then walked in different directions. The purse containing the golden dragons was hidden in the shop in Shoemaker Square. Robb only took out 3 silver deer from his body, which were the remaining from the bribery of the golden robe yesterday. In his previous life, He was used to carrying only a mobile phone and never cash. This time, he finally realized that he would be unable to move without money at this time. The cost of the inn in King's Landing is higher than that in South Corner. Even if Robb is not worried about the search by the gold cloaks, he cannot afford to pay for a few days accommodation if he wants to stay in the inn. The robe he picked up during the escape at noon is completely the wrong size. It is okay for emergency use, but it is impossible to wear it out. Therefore, after giving a silver coin and asking Gendry to buy a set of clothes in the style of King's Landing according to his height, Robb only has 2 silver coins left. The long sword that helped him escape from the siege was full of small notches and had been melted into iron by Gendry. It didn't take long for Gendry to bring him back a set of dark blue linen robes in obvious southern style. The thoughtful Gendry also bought him a small piece of mirror ointment with the remaining change. At the same time, he also brought back news from outside. At present, the muddy road near the Mudgate and the Hook Lane of Fisherman's Square are being searched layer by hundreds of gold cloaks and Lannister soldiers. The Shoemaker Square, an important intersection of Steel Street, is also guarded, but not so strictly. They will only check if they see suspicious people. If they don't find anything at the Mudgate and Fisherman's Square, they will probably turn to these 2 places to continue searching. But compared to this era, King's Landing is indeed very large. It is still very time consuming to search with less than 1,000 people. It should not be possible to search here for a while. Robb washed himself with clean water, asked Gendry to help apply ointment on his back, and put on a new linen robe. Robb, who was temporarily inconvenient to show up, once again shamelessly gave Gendry a silver deer and asked him to help him again. A ragged muddy-faced little boy of about 8 or 9 years old was sitting on the street of Steel Street, reaching out to passers-by for alms. If someone kept staring at him, they would find that, even if someone gave him copper coins, his eyes were not on the copper coins, but always staring at the blacksmith shop opposite. The black-haired boy in the blacksmith shop came out. But unlike the last time, this time the black-haired boy looked around at the door for a while, and when he saw him, he actually ran straight to him. "Little guy, what's your name?" the black-haired boy asked the little boy with a smile. The little boy stared at him straight, as if he didn't understand what he said. The black-haired boy scratched his greasy hair, took out a silver deer from his arms, and said to him again, "As long as you open your mouth, this silver deer will be yours." A silver deer is still very attractive to the little boy. He thought about it, and opened his mouth to the black-haired boy. Under the setting sun, the little boy's tongue was neatly broken at the root, and his empty mouth made the black-haired boy feel cold on his back. He forced a smile on his face, took the little boy's right hand, put the silver deer in his palm, and said softly, "Tell Lord Varys that the direwolf wants to see him." Hearing this, the little boy's eyes widened, tightly grasped the silver coin in his hand, and immediately stood up and ran towards the Red Castle. Watching the little boy running away, the black-haired boy Gendry shook his head and whispered to himself, "We are all pitiful people without power." As the night gradually fell, Steel Street was no longer as noisy as it was during the day. But for Steel Street, many businesses are negotiated at night. After all, when buying weapons to kill, customers who have already started to kill will subconsciously choose the dark night. Bang! When Gendry was carefully cleaning up the blacksmith shop, a figure fell at the door of the blacksmith shop. He hurried to the door and saw that it was a fat drunk who fell face down on the ground. Chapter 63, Leaving. The drunk was wearing a tattered and dirty robe, with only one shoe on his foot. The other foot was covered with mud. He held a sheepskin wine bag in his right hand, and the smell of alcohol on his body was enough to choke a mouse. Gendry frowned and covered his mouth and nose with his right hand. He bent down and pushed the drunk with his left hand and asked in a muffled voice, "Hey, are you okay? I want to see the direwolf." The drunk said to Gendry in a weak and soft voice, then immediately turned over and shouted loudly in a thick voice, "Keep drinking, I want to drink more. Ugh. Water, I want to drink water." When Gendry heard the first sentence, he was shocked. He forced himself to control his facial expression, looked up and looked around the street, and found that there were still a few people on the street. So he shook his head and said to the drunk loudly, "What bad luck." Bang! As soon as Gendry finished speaking, he reached out to help the drunk man up, but the drunk man suddenly turned over again, and his arm turned and hit Gendry's hand. After being hit like this, Gendry paused for a moment, and then changed his action from helping to carrying, and dragged the drunk man, who was once again face down on the ground, by the back of his robe and neck, and dragged him forward. Fortunately, as a blacksmith's apprentice, he had strong hands, otherwise, he might not be able to drag this fat drunk man. He dragged the drunk man like this, moving towards the blacksmith's shop. In the warehouse of the blacksmith shop, Robb, watching Gendry bringing people in, fanned the smell of alcohol in front of his nose with his hand, and said to the fat drunkard, "Lord Varys, your disguise is too realistic. The smell of alcohol makes people not want to get close to you at all. I'm suffering like this, isn't it to see you, Lord Robb? You will hurt my heart if you say such words." However, the gold cloaks guarding the intersection really have no intention of getting close to me. Maybe they all think you are near the mud gate, so the inspection is not strict. After entering the warehouse, the fat drunkard supported himself with his hands and slowly climbed up from the ground, while speaking softly, blaming Robb. Yes, Lord Varys, I take back my inappropriate words just now. May I ask, what is the situation in King's Landing now? Robb nodded and apologized, then changed the subject, and returned to the topic. Varys, with his face covered in dirt and disguise, continued to answer in his soft tone, "Of your men, only Eddard Stark was captured by Jaime Lannister, and the others were all killed in the battle. Don't think of relying on your direwolf. According to my investigation, there are at least 20 crossbowmen guarding it. I believe that your direwolf does not have dragon scales on its body, and cannot withstand the crossbow arrows. The reason why the Lannisters did not move the inn outside the city is that they are waiting for you to come there yourself. There is a trap set there like a spider web. Only Eddard is alive." Hearing the information Varys said, Robb pursed his lips, a sad expression on his face. He is now being held solitary in a single cell for noble captives on the second level of the Red Keep dungeon. This Eddard Stark suffered no serious injuries in the battle, nor was he tortured in the dungeon. Varys told the information he knew, and finally joked with a pursed mouth, "You failed to rescue Eddard, and you sent another one in. However, based on the current situation, the Lannister spy should be him. Lord Varys is right, and from all the signs now, he is the spy. However, I always feel that something is wrong about this matter." Robb frowned and answered Varys, then shook his head and continued, "Let's not talk about the spy for now. Lord Varys, I asked you to come here to ask you. I understand, I have arranged it in advance. You will go to Angie's blacksmith shop quietly in the early hours of this morning. Tomorrow morning, he will arrange a carriage to help you leave King's Landing." Varys nodded and replied to him before Robb finished speaking. "I would like to ask you to agree to my last request. I want to go to the dark cell." "What? Did I hear you right? Lord Robb, you are being hunted by the whole city now. Instead of escaping for your life, you are thinking of going to the dark cell." Varys first showed an expression of disbelief, and then praised sincerely, "However, I really admire your courage, and appreciate your persistence in rescuing your relatives. Thank you for the compliment, Lord Varys. I believe that, if your relatives are in trouble, you will do the same thing." "I don't have any relatives." Robb's words touched Varys a little. As he spoke, his eyes were a little vague. After a slight distraction, he immediately recovered and continued, "I agree to your request, but you have to promise me that, if you fail to persuade Lord Eddard, you must not take him to break into the dark cell by force." "Lord Varys, I swear to the new and old gods, I promise to do as you ask." Seeing that Varys finally agreed to his request, Robb immediately swore with a look of joy on his face. "Okay, then when are you going to act? If it's okay with you, I plan to do it on the day of His Majesty the King's funeral. A wise choice. At that time the Red Castle's garrison will be reduced by at least half. Well, I can't stay too long. Please go to Angie's blacksmith shop and wait patiently for my notice." Well, for some reason, there are more spies watching this blacksmith shop. After discussing the time with Robb, Varys turned around and prepared to leave. "Lord Varys, thank you for your help. I will repay these favors in the future. However, there is no need to stay in Angie's blacksmith shop. I have my own plans, and King's Landing will not be peaceful in the next 2 days. Hearing Robb's words of thanks, Varys waved his hand without looking back, and then when he heard the last sentence, he paused, but still did not speak, and walked out of the blacksmith shop with a shaky step. Drink. Keep drinking. Cheers. Varys pretended to be a drunkard, staggered out of the blacksmith shop, drank his sheepskin wineskin, shouted loudly, and staggered away. Gendry, who was standing at the door, looked at his back and couldn't help but secretly admire his acting skills. When he turned back to the blacksmith shop, Robb had already walked out of the warehouse and was selecting weapons in the blacksmith shop. How much is this longsword? Robb turned around and asked, playing with a standard longsword in his hand. That is a refined longsword made by my master. 120 silver deer. Listening to Gendry's offer, Robb put down the longsword in his hand with some embarrassment. At present, his entire assets only have 1 silver deer. I made this dagger with scraps. I'll give it to you. Gendry walked to the blacksmith's operating table, rummaged out a dagger from it, and threw it directly to Robb. Robb caught the dagger accurately, and gestured left and right. He nodded, took out the last silver deer from his arms, flicked it to Gendry with his thumb, and said with a smile, a very handy weapon. I'm willing to use all my assets to buy it. You are such a generous man. Gendry received the silver deer, rubbed it in his hand for a few times, and said with a smile, Gendry, I still have a lot of things to do. If you think about it, in 2 days, when I send a signal, you will immediately go to the capstan tower of the Blackwater River to wait for me. Robb smiled at him, and said as he walked towards the back door, Signal? What signal? Hearing Robb's words, Gendry frowned and asked at his back. You will know, when the time comes. Thank you to Gunwu for voting for the monthly ticket. I also thank all the readers who vote and read every day. P.S. Because of your support, this book has been promoted again. Starting tomorrow, I will enter Robb's rhythm. Please continue to support me. Thank you. Chapter 64 Yelin. It was a quiet night after midnight, and the round moon was hanging high in the night sky. At the edge of the flea ditch, a drunk with a stained face and wearing a dark blue robe was staggering on the street. The stench of alcohol on his body could be smelled from a distance, and the occasional patrolling golden robes frowned and avoided him from a distance. 2 poor people in the flea ditch hiding in the dark saw this drunken fat sheep out of the sight of the golden robes, and then stepped forward to hold him on both sides and dragged him into the dark alley. You know, for the poor people in the flea ditch, his whole body is a wealth, including this body, that can be used to make brown soup. Surprisingly, a few minutes later, the drunk staggered back to the street again. Maybe the 2 kind poor people accidentally fell asleep. When the drunk staggered to a small house with the family emblem of gold coins painted on squares engraved on the door, he immediately moved quickly and rushed to the back of the house. This drunkard was Robb, who was imitating Varys' disguise. This 2-story shabby cottage was the residence of the Royal Marshal, Lin Li. There were doors and windows in front and back of the cottage. After Robb came to the back of the cottage, he tried to push the door and window, and they were indeed tightly closed. Yes, it was located on the edge of the flea pit. If the door was not properly locked at night, people might be gone in the morning. He took out the dagger in his arms and began to pry up the shabby window eaves of the cottage. Click. With a slight sound, the wooden strips of the shabby window eaves were pried open by Robb. He held the loose window and listened to the movement in the house. After making sure that there was no sound in the house, Robb slowly raised the window and leaned in. Rumble. This cottage was very dirty and messy. With the bright moonlight tonight, he could roughly see the food scraps, wine bottles, and garbage thrown everywhere in the house. However, moonlight is not light. Robb kicked a wine bottle accidentally as soon as he stood firm. The sound of the rolling bottles made him freeze. However, Lin Li seemed to be sleeping very soundly, and Robb did not hear any movement in the house. A few minutes later, he moved again. This time, he walked very carefully, avoiding various obstacles under his feet. The room Robb entered should be Lin's kitchen. He came to the room in front of the first floor. There were large and small whetstones and many tools for maintaining weapons. As the royal executioner, Lin should often sharpen his execution weapons here. Since there was no target on the first floor, Robb naturally moved upstairs with the dagger in his hand. Robb had just walked carefully up the stairs and stepped onto the second floor. A candlelight ignited in the room on the right. Whoosh! When Robb was squinting his eyes to adapt to the sudden light, he heard a familiar sound of a giant sword swinging, and at the same time, saw a black shadow coming straight to his neck from the right. But compared to the attack of the mountain's giant sword during the day, the speed of this sword was not very fast, enough for him to lower his head and roll to the left to avoid it. Swish! After the giant sword lost its target, it easily cut a large gap in the wooden wall next to the stairs. Robb rolled nimbly and stood up. He found that Lion, who was almost bald and had sunken cheeks, was holding his father Eddard's ice and staring at him with wide eyes in surprise. Lion was very surprised. He was sleeping upstairs. He heard the movement downstairs and smelled the pungent smell of alcohol. He began to think that it was a desperate poor man in a flea pit. He thought that he could light up the candlestick on the wall and easily behead him with a sword when the light and darkness alternated, but who knew that the other party easily avoided the attack. When he saw the other party's face that was not completely covered by stains, he roughly recognized that this was Robb Stark. After all, when he followed King Robert to Winterfell, he had carefully observed and heard rumors about the young wolf all the way. However, what surprised him was that everyone thought Robb was hiding in the Fisherman's Square at Mudgate. But he turned up at his house. Because his tongue was pulled out by the order of King Aerys II, Lin could not say much, so he let the ice, which he held tightly in both hands, speak for him. Unlike the mountain who used a two-handed greatsword with one hand, Lin, as an ordinary person, of course had to use both hands to swing the ice. He held the crossguard of the hilt of the ice sword with his right hand, and the round counterweight at the end of the hilt with his left hand. He used both hands to swing the ice from back to front, and swung it in a semicircle of nearly 180 degrees. Clang! The ice, carrying its own weight and the kinetic energy of Lin's strength, hit Robb's position just now. The solid wood floor of the cabin was easily cut into by the ice, made of Valyrian steel, like tofu. And Robb had already dodged again. Lion, who had always used a two-handed sword, seemed to have expected that the sword would not hit easily. He immediately took a step forward with his left foot, and at the same time, the ice brought up many wood chips, and he moved up and down. Robb took a step back, bent his waist, and raised his head, dodged the tip of Lion's sword, and stabilized his body again with a volley backflip. However, Lion, who had already started, took a step forward with his right foot, after moving up, and chopped from top to bottom again. His attack method was like Cheng Yeojan's 3 axes. There was only one purpose, that was to kill people. Simple, effective, and no unnecessary movements. Robb now regretted that when he was going upstairs just now, he subconsciously rolled to the left to avoid the sudden attack from the right. If he had just rushed forward to the right and cut into Lion's side, he would not have been able to do so at this moment, and was forced to follow his attack rhythm. The HUD was not spacious, and when Robb dodged the chop again, he had already reached the corner of the wall. Young Lion was once the captain of Tywin's guards. He used these 3 axes to help Tywin kill many enemies. But he was old after all. After swinging the 3 ice swords with all his strength, the connection between them was obviously slow. Robb, who was already familiar with Lion's attack rhythm, seized this opportunity. Before he could charge up again, to use the greatsword to swing upward, he directly threw the dagger in his hand at him. At the same time, he kicked his right foot against the wall vigorously, and the whole person approached Lion quickly like an arrow from a string. Ding. With the flickering candlelight, Lion saw Robb throwing the dagger in his hand, and he directly raised his sword to block in front of him, and directly bounced the dagger away. But what Robb wanted was to interrupt his continuous attack rhythm, so that he could find a close opportunity. When he moved away the ice, and prepared to attack again, Robb had already arrived in front of him. Bang. Ding. Robb's right fist hit Lion's right hand holding the sword. The huge force directly hit Lion's right hand numb, and the ice fell to the ground. Robb, who was in a dominant position, immediately hit Lion on the right face with a left hook, causing him to fall backwards on his back with blood and old teeth spurting out of his mouth. Robb did not stop there. He directly stepped over and sat on Lion, punching him left and right continuously. One punch, two punches, three punches. Boom, boom, boom. A series of muffled sounds rang out in the hut. When Robb suppressed the desire to continue punching, Lion on the ground was no longer a human. His head was beaten like a somewhat shriveled oval blood ball. One eye was hammered out, the bridge of his nose collapsed, and his chin was opened and cracked, unable to close. Ha, ha. There was no red mist rising. Hearing his weak breathing, Robb knew that Lion was not dead yet. His remaining eye was still staring at Robb, with complex emotions such as begging, pleading, and confusion in his eyes. Perhaps he really didn't know how to offend Robb. Although the ice was temporarily stored with him, because Eddard Stark was captured, this should not lead to a fatal disaster. Robb slowly stood up, looked down at Lion, and said softly, "I'm sorry, you are on my sister's list." Bang! He raised his foot and stepped down, and red mist rose into the air. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 65 Bloody Night. Blood contract points +5. A small stream of red mist, which was more than half of that of an ordinary person, merged into Robb's body. It restored his physical strength and healed his injuries to a certain extent. Although he and Island had made some noise in the hut just now, as the poor and chaotic Fleepit area, even if he had a tongue to call for help, I believe no neighbors would come to check. So Robb did not leave immediately, but bent down to pick up the ice from the ground, and looked at it carefully. The ice forged from Valyrian steel shone coldly under the candlelight, making anyone look at it, and feel that it was extremely sharp. The blade was wider than the palm, and a blood groove in the middle went straight to the tip of the sword. The crossguard at the end of the blade was as dark as black smoke, and the hilt did not have too much decoration. The whole sword gave people a feeling that it was a simple and unpretentious killing weapon. This ice could be called the sword of the Lord Stark. Eddard had protected it very well in the past, and would never let his children touch it. Whoosh, whoosh. Robb held ice in his right hand, and swung it heavily a few times. Although he could also swing it with one hand, due to his height, he felt that it was more convenient to use both hands. Robb picked up Ice's new scabbard, and put ice into the scabbard. Before, ice had always been in a scabbard wrapped in animal fur, and carried by a special person. Now Island replaced it with a leather belt scabbard wrapped in black cloth, which is more convenient to carry. After finishing his business, Robb threw away his dark blue robe that was full of alcohol odor, rummaged through the boxes and cabinets, and found a black robe of Island. While looking for clothes, he had some unexpected gains, and found a purse containing more than 40 silver deer. Although this money is not much, it can just solve Robb's embarrassment of being penniless. Robb, wearing a black robe, and carrying ice diagonally with a belt on the scabbard, looked like a complete executioner. Robb picked up the dagger he had just thrown at Island, which was stained with blood that had not yet coagulated on the ground, and wrote a sentence on the wall. After writing, Robb nodded with satisfaction, went downstairs and opened the door. Seeing that there was no one on the street, he swaggered and left Island's hut. Although Island's hut was on the edge of Flea Bottom, it was not too far from Egan's High Hill. Robb's outfit was obviously not easy to mess with. The poor people in the dark of Flea Bottom did not have the courage to provoke him. He just needed to be careful to avoid the lazy patrolling gold cloaks. At the top of Egan's High Hill stood the Red Castle, which symbolized the highest power in the kingdom. And below the walls of the Red Castle, there was a large area of high-end residences built around it. Those who could live here were basically the powerful and influential class in King's Landing. So when Robb walked on this street, he could obviously see more gold cloaks patrolling in groups of 2 along the way. Although it was already quite late at night, there were still carriages coming and going on this street. A few female giggles could be heard from some carriages. "Hey, what are you doing?" When they reached the street of the target location, a pair of patrolling gold cloaks noticed that Robb, who was standing in the dark of the street, immediately stepped forward to ask, "Lord Jaime Lannister sent me to deliver a letter to Lord Janos Slynt. Excuse me, where does he live?" When Robb saw the gold cloaks approaching, he adjusted his posture and lied calmly. Yes, Lord Slind lives in that big house. But, delivering a letter so late? Where is the letter? Hearing the name of the Kingslayer, the Gold Cloak immediately pointed to a big house in front of Robb. But the Gold Cloak suddenly reacted and asked again. I will do whatever Lord Jaime arranges. As for the letter, do you really want to see it? Robb answered the Gold Cloak's question very stubbornly, and his right hand touched the handle of the dagger at the back of his waist. I think, click, click. Before the Gold Cloak finished speaking, Robb's right dagger slashed across his neck very quickly. His neck was like a fruit with a big gap cut in it, and a lot of red juice flowed out instantly. The other Gold Cloak, who didn't speak, was stunned by this change. He was about to draw his sword and roar, but Robb was prepared. While dealing with the Gold Cloak on the right, he stretched out his left hand to cover his mouth, and stabbed his left neck with the dagger from right to left. After dealing with the two Gold Cloaks, Robb looked around and no one noticed that this dark corner had swallowed two lives. Just now, the Gold Cloak confirmed the address of the second target, the commander of the Gold Cloaks, Janos Slind. After Robb wiped the blood from his hands, he walked towards the big house in front. The commander of the Gold Cloaks, Janos, was obviously very wealthy. Robb approached and saw that it was a 3-story luxurious house with a flower garden. Moreover, this cowardly Janos abused his power and arranged 2 Gold Cloaks to guard his door. The 2 Gold Cloaks guarding the gate were obviously not conscientious about this mandatory gatekeeping job. They were now yawning and chatting on the gate. For Robb, it was a piece of cake to deal with them. Disguised as a messenger for Lord Jaime, Robb dragged the bodies of the 2 Gold Cloaks into the gate a minute later and moved towards this luxurious residence. According to the information obtained by Robb, Janos used his power to make bribery and the sale of official titles semi-transparent and obtained a large amount of wealth. It was indeed the case. His home was extremely luxurious. The banquet hall on the first floor had all kinds of fine wines, delicacies, antiques, and toys. In addition to the hall, the first floor was a banquet restaurant, and there were no bedrooms. Robb carefully went up to the second floor. On the second floor lived Janos's 3 sons and 1 daughter. His eldest son was a knight's squire, and the other 2 sons were also arranged by Janos to work in good positions. To prevent accidents, Robb quietly entered the room and killed them in their sleep with a dagger. When Robb touched the candlelit master bedroom on the 3rd floor, he saw this short and strong bald man sleeping soundly with an exotic SS beauty on a goose-down bed. After Janos's original wife died of unknown reasons, his lover changed very frequently. Although this lover was implicated, Robb did not let her go mercifully. Hey, wake up. After getting rid of Janos's lover, Robb put the dagger against his throat and called softly, HMM. Janos, who was still confused at first, subconsciously wanted to shout when he saw Robb holding the dagger, but Robb, who had been prepared, covered his mouth with his hand. If you scream, you'll end up like her. If you can understand, blink. Hearing Robb's words, Janos turned his head and looked at the poor lover beside him, whose throat was cut and whose blood stained half of the goose-down bed. He immediately blinked non-stop. Very good, I need you to write something for me. Robb slowly released his left hand that was covering Janos' mouth and said, can you promise that you won't hurt me after I finish writing? By the way, you can't hurt my children after that. Janos was still able to recognize the situation. After releasing his mouth, he didn't shout loudly. Robb nodded and said seriously, I promise that, after you finish writing, I won't hurt your children, and I will reunite your family. Thanks to Sugared Boiled Water, Sugared Water, and TIN for voting for the monthly ticket. At the same time, thanks to all the big guys who voted for the recommendation and followed the reading every day. Thank you for your support. Chapter 66 Clay. In the famous Silk Street of King's Landing, it was almost dawn. Many prostitutes had finished their busy night work and began to fall into sweet dreams. On the street, there were some guests from the Silk Street Academy who were in a hurry to go home and dishevel. Robb, wearing a black robe and carrying Han Bing wrapped in black cloth, walked to the corner of Silk Street and knocked on the door of a small house with the Chinese character engraved on the door. Creak. The door was opened immediately. Robb looked around and went in directly. This was a small house with various interesting decorations. The area was not too big or small. At this moment, there were 3 middle-aged men with fierce faces, and a young man who was also wearing a black robe. Lord Robb. Seeing Robb enter the small house, the black-robed young man immediately bowed and greeted him. Robb smiled and nodded, patted the black-robed boy on the shoulder, and said, "Don't be so polite. Clay, you came back before me. It seems that everything went smoothly?" "Yes, Lord Robb. We have completed the task ahead of time. The 3 were drunk, and didn't have to work hard at all." The handsome black-robed boy, Clay Severn, answered gently. He is the Earl of Severn City, the eldest son of Mickey Severn. When Robb went to Hallwood City and made a deal with Ramsay, he secretly went to Severn City to visit Earl Mickey Severn. At that time, Earl Mickey, who was already loyal and friendly to the Stark family, gritted his teeth and proposed to let his son join the Wolf Guard for training in order to get closer to Robb. However, Robb, who had his own arrangements, did not intend to take Clay back to Winterfell after accepting his allegiance. Instead, he arranged for him to go to King's Landing, which was considered a chess piece arranged in advance by Robb. That night, he quietly went to King's Landing under the protection of 3 trusted guards selected by Lord Mech. This is why, when Robb invited the northern nobles to review the army in Winterfell, Lord Mech went to Winterfell early in person, except for the Lord Earl whose children served in Winterfell and Lord Wyman who personally delivered the myrrh ointment. The task Robb gave him at the beginning was very simple, that is, to go to King's Landing, find a crowded and busy street to settle himself, and then try every means to build a good relationship with the middle-level officers of the Gold Cloaks. Apart from this, don't get involved in anything else. Robb emphasized this point many times, so when Clay knew that Ed was arrested and his accompanying guards and servants were slaughtered, he also resisted the urge to go and investigate. Last night, Robb, who disguised himself as a drunkard, left the blacksmith shop. He found Clay's settlement on Silk Street according to the signs agreed in advance. Then after Robb assigned their respective tasks, they split into 2 groups. By the way, Clay, last time you wrote me back, you said that you had found the retreat route. Are you sure you have arranged it? After hearing his reply, Robb nodded and asked again. No one in Winterfell knew about his secret contact with Clay except Master Lewin. Fortunately, it was like this. Otherwise, if the spies knew about it, Robb's advance layout would be ruined. Based on the general information you provided, we have been out exploring every day for more than a month. I guarantee that there will be no problems with the retreat route. Clay heard his question and nodded in a very affirmative tone. Well, when the day breaks, the high-ranking officials in King's Landing will be in danger. They may think that I'm taking revenge randomly, but they don't know that our purpose is hidden in this revenge. Lord Robb, what if these things are suppressed by those people in the Red Castle, or someone finds out our purpose? Hearing that, Clay thought of the worst result before doing anything. Robb nodded secretly. He praised his caution in his heart and continued, if it is suppressed, don't we still have tonight and tomorrow night? At that time, these high-ranking officials in King's Landing will be afraid of the coming of night. As for finding out our real purpose, if Tywin or Tyrion is in King's Landing, I may be a little worried. And if others are very careful, they may find out that Janos wrote something before his death. However, this will not have much impact on our plan. Yes, Lord Robb, just think about it. The handsome young man Clay nodded and replied with a mature look. Oh. Robb was about to speak, but the soundproofing of the hut was not very good, and he was interrupted by the shouting from the next door. He took out a bag of gold dragons from his black robe and threw it on the table in the hut. He touched his nose and said, Clay, although I asked you to find a busy street, but, living here, can you sleep at night? This is the unexpected gain I got from Janos, 100 gold dragons. You are more familiar with King's Landing. You can distribute and use this money. Lord Robb, I chose this place for a reason. The technical college is naturally the best place for information to flow, and those middle and higher level dignitaries and gold robes also like to come here. The deputy captain I got in touch with also met here. This money came in time and can be used. Clay smiled and explained the reason why he chose this hut, and then took the bag of gold dragons on the table in his hand without hesitation. Well, you were busy last night. Take a good rest. Well, can you really sleep here? Listening to the continuous voices, Robb shook his head helplessly. Lord Robb, I have been socializing here for more than 2 months and have met many beautiful women with different styles. No, I must rest now and we will talk later. Yes, sir. As the morning sun shines on King's Landing, a scream opens a prelude to the chaos in King's Landing. Red Keep, Throne Room. Your Majesty, this morning, the royal lawman, Lin Li, was found dead at home, and the commander of the Gold Cloaks, Janis Slynt, and his whole family died at home. 3 captains of the city gate guards who were on duty died in a tavern. They should have been killed by Robb Stark. Varys reported the intelligence he had just obtained this morning to Joffrey, who was sitting on the Iron Throne, with a serious face. Didn't they say Robb Stark was hiding near the Mudgate? Why is he killing people everywhere? Did the Gold Cloaks catch him? Hearing that his officials were killed, Joffrey frowned and asked loudly, Your Majesty, when the Gold Cloaks arrived at the scene, they only saw these corpses. They didn't even see the shadow of Robb Stark. After Janis' death, Baelish temporarily took over the Gold Cloaks. Hearing Joffrey's question, he immediately answered. Joffrey immediately asked, Since no one was seen, how can you be sure it was Robb Stark? Baelish turned his head and looked at Varys. Seeing that he had his hands in his sleeves, he looked as steady as a rock. He had to speak for himself. Your Majesty, next to all the corpses, there was a sign of winter is coming written in blood. Chapter 67 Action. You bastard Stark, you dare to challenge me in King's Landing. I will chop off their heads and put them on spears for public display. When Joffrey heard what Baelish said, he immediately thought that Robb was provoking him. With his hot temper, he immediately shouted excitedly, Joffrey, don't be so excited. Your uncle Jaime has already led his troops to search. I believe it won't be long before that wolf cub kneels down in front of you. Cersei, who was standing by, saw that her son was showing signs of losing his composure again, and immediately spoke to comfort him. It's not enough to rely on those more than 200 Lannister soldiers. Baelish, mobilize more Gold Cloaks to assist in the search. Don't search the Mudgate, the people are no longer there. Joffrey's temper came and went quickly. After being comforted by Cersei, he returned to normal and gave orders to Baelish. Yes, Your Majesty. 2 days. You must capture Robb Stark within 2 days. Hearing Joffrey's order, Baelish nodded in response, but then he heard the time-limited arrest order he issued. Your Majesty, this may be unlikely. King's Landing has a population of nearly 500,000, but there are only more than 2,600 Gold Cloaks in total, and even with the Lannister soldiers, there are less than 3,000 of them. They need to guard the Red Keep and the 7 gates and other important areas, and they have to patrol the entire city. After what happened today, the nobles outside the Red Keep have requested that more Gold Cloaks be deployed in their residential areas. Even if Gold Cloaks are transferred from other places, I don't think it is likely to catch Robb Stark in a short period of time. Baelish finished what he wanted to say in one breath, and seeing Joffrey's unfriendly expression, he changed the subject and threw the blame on Varys. Of course, if Lord Varys' little bads can get Robb Stark's hiding address, then it is absolutely possible to catch him within 2 days. Well, you are right. Varys, you must get Robb Stark's hiding address within 2 days. Otherwise the intelligence chief should be replaced. Your Majesty, this. Cersei looked at Joffrey and the other 2 in the throne room and suddenly said, My son, I don't think it's necessary to limit the arrest time. I believe that Lord Baelish and Lord Varys will do their best to serve you. Don't you agree? Yes, Your Majesty. Yes. Hearing Cersei's help, Baelish and Varys both bowed slightly to her in response. Your Majesty, there is news from the High Septon that the funeral ceremony for His Majesty Robert will be held at noon tomorrow. Seeing that Joffrey fell silent after hearing Cersei's words, Baelish spoke again and changed the subject. Well, we will set out from the Red Keep before the sun reaches the top of our heads tomorrow. Joffrey nodded and replied after hearing the report. Suddenly, he remembered that Robb Stark was still spying in the dark, so he continued, tomorrow, strengthen the guards from the Red Keep to the Great Sept of Baelor. I don't want anything to happen. As you command, Your Majesty. Knock, knock, knock. 3 consecutive knocks on the door woke Robb in the small house on Silk Street. He immediately stood up and saw that a 7-city guard who was in charge of guarding was pointing at his waist to indicate that there was a child outside. Robb immediately knew that this was Varys' little bird, so he immediately stood up to greet it. However, he was very cautious and took out the dagger with his right hand and hid it behind his back and opened the door with his left hand. Creak. Robb opened the door a crack and saw a little girl of 8 or 9 years old with a dirty face holding out a note. Since the siege 2 days ago, Robb, who was more cautious, did not reach out to take it, but turned his head to look at the 7-city guard beside him. The guard nodded and reached out to take the note. After the little girl completed her task, she looked at Robb eagerly. Robb hesitated for a moment and took out a silver deer from his arms with his left hand and gave it to her. Seeing the little girl holding the silver deer and running away happily, Robb closed the door. Today I went hunting with my dog Golden Lion and got a stag. We plan to have a stag dinner at noon tomorrow. I invite you to come to my North Tower residence before dawn tomorrow to reminisce about the past. The guard of 7 City unfolded the note and read the contents. Hearing the contents of the note, Robb easily understood the message that Varys wanted to convey. First, the soldiers of the Golden Cloaks and the Angry Lion family were searching for Robb's hiding place today. Varys reminded him not to act rashly. Then the funeral of King Robert will be held at noon tomorrow. Finally, Varys asked him to meet at the North Tower residential area outside the Red Castle before dawn tomorrow. Clay, start the action as planned tonight, and take action when you hear the signal tomorrow. Robb thought for a while in his mind and spoke to Clay. As you command, Lord Robb. If your action is unsuccessful, please try to go to the retreat route. I will ensure that it is open. Clay nodded when he heard this. He always thought of the worst outcome first, and he emphasized the retreat route. Yes. Got it. Clay, you really reassure me. Since they are acting according to our plan, let's rest well today and wait for the night to fall. Today, King's Landing is in great chaos. Flea Bottom and Egan's High Hill are in chaos because of thousands of gold cloaks and more than 200 Lannister soldiers. After their careful search, although they did not find any trace of Robb, they also found many lawless criminals, so it was not a complete failure. Night slowly fell, and Silk Street, which was quiet during the day, seemed to come alive, exuding its unique atmosphere of luxury and corruption. The door of the hut where Robb and others were hiding was opened, and 4 Clays, dressed in gold robes, walked out of it. That's right, the 4 of them were genuine gold robes, belonging to the South Tower guard team outside the south gate of the Red Castle. Well, because Clay had made connections, although they had this title, they didn't have to stand guard. Today was their first and last time to perform their duties. Clay did not go directly to the South Tower, but took 3 guards, and came to a mid-range technical academy with ease, and found their deputy captain, Gray. Deputy Captain Gray was in his usual private room, playing a don't-eating game with 2 young beauties with full upper bodies. All of you go out, Captain Gray and I have something to discuss. Clay, who was not shy, spoke directly to the 2 beauties with a serious face. Go out first. Beauties. Gray looked at Clay's serious expression, patted the 2 beauties' hips, and spoke. After watching them go out, Clay turned his head and nodded to the 3 guards behind him. They turned around and went out, guarding the door of the private room. Captain Gray, I have done what I promised you. Here are 50 gold royals. Clay took out a bag of gold royals from his arms and threw it to Gray, saying at the same time, I didn't expect it. Clem, you are actually from the Stark family. I just proposed it to you, hoping to get promoted. You are so brave that you just killed people. A lot of big shots died last night. Clay opened the bag with a smile on his face and checked the gold royals one by one. At the same time, he was busy calling Clay's alias in King's Landing. The captain of the guard who has been suppressing you is dead. Now it's natural for you to become the captain, right? If you can make good use of this money and have better luck, maybe you will be the next commander of the Gold Cloaks. Lord Gray. Hehe. Looking at Gray who was smiling foolishly, Clay continued to say to him, we have done everything we promised. Now, it's your turn. Thank you, Mr. Dabake, for voting for the monthly ticket. At the same time, thank you to all the big guys who vote for recommendations and follow me every day. Thank you for your support. Chapter 68 Secret Passage. Hey, Clem, have you never worried that I would report you directly? Hearing Clay's words, Gray did not respond directly, but asked him back. If you don't report us, you can get promoted and make a fortune. If you report us, as long as one of us escapes, you will always worry about yourself, and when you will be like Janus Slint, and your whole family will die in their sleep. After all, the North will never forget. Clay heard this, and did not threaten fiercely, but just stated a fact in a calm tone with a blank expression. But his words made Gray's hair stand on end. He forced a smile and said, "Today, a notice was sent to transfer half of the manpower to assist in the search. I can arrange for you to go to change shifts in the early morning. Then, let's have fun first. After all, it will be a while before the change of shifts. Lord Grey, you made a fortune today, shouldn't you treat us? Usually, I treat you all." Clay heard this, and his face instantly broke into a smile, and spoke in the tone of an old friend. Gray secretly wiped the sweat off his forehead and answered, "No problem, let them in, you choose." The 5 Clays stayed here until almost dawn, then they tidied up their clothes, and went to the South Tower to change guards. When the 5 of them arrived at the South Tower, 40 gold cloaks were just changing guards in the open space under the tower. Deputy Captain Gray. Seeing Gray approaching with his men, the gold cloaks immediately saluted him. "Well, Blake, Darth, and the other 5 will be on duty with me. The rest of you go home and rest. Tomorrow morning, go to Flea Bottom to assist in the search for Robb Stark." Hearing that they still called him Deputy Captain, Gray replied arrogantly and gave orders. As soon as Gray's order was issued, except for the 5 people he named, the other gold cloaks immediately whispered, "How easy it is to stand guard at the South Tower. Going to search for Robb Stark, whose reputation gradually spread throughout King's Landing, is tiring and dangerous." In the past 2 days, the number of gold cloaks who died on duty was the sum of the previous years. Seeing that Gray had appointed his subordinates, someone in the gold cloaks asked, "Deputy Captain Gray, I heard that the city guard only needs to dispatch half of its personnel to conduct the search. Why do we need so many people here? The king's funeral will be held tomorrow, and some of the gold cloaks who searched before will go to maintain order. So the city guard dispatched more personnel to assist in the search. This is the order from the Red Castle. But, no buts. The captain was killed by Robb Stark, and now I'm the captain here. Those who disobey the orders of their superiors will be sent to the Red Castle dungeon." After Gray explained, he saw that they wanted to say more, so he frowned and showed his official power to suppress them. "Yes." The gold cloaks looked at each other and answered weakly. After the 35 gold cloaks changed their shifts, they each walked towards their homes. Gray took Clay and 9 others into the South Tower. After taking the iron-headed spear and the standard longsword from the armory, they climbed up the tower and began their guard duty today. The job of the city guards was indeed quite easy. Gray and the others chatted and boasted, talking about obscene topics. Time passed slowly, and before dawn, Robb, wearing ice and a black robe, came to the residential area of the North Tower corresponding to the South Tower. As soon as he entered the residential area, a boy of 8 or 9 years old came to him and stretched out his right hand to him. Robb skillfully took out a silver deer from his arms and gave it to him. After taking the silver deer, he pointed forward and walked forward. Robb, who knew that he was leading the way, followed him silently. After winding around this residential area for a while, they came to a house located between the north gate of the Red Castle and the North Tower. Creak. The little boy pushed open the unlocked door and entered it. He skillfully crawled on the ground and fumbled a few times, then lifted a wooden board and jumped in. Secret passage. Varys has controlled all the secret passages of the Red Keep for many years. A lot of his important intelligence was obtained and transmitted by the little bad through these secret passages. Without any hesitation, Robb jumped in. If Varys wanted to harm him, he would have had the opportunity long ago, and would not have waited until now. This is a stone tunnel nearly 2 meters high, and 1 meter wide. There is a small oil lamp on the wall at intervals in the tunnel. The dim light can make people roughly see the road under their feet. The little boy in front saw Robb standing still, and waved at him vigorously. Robb did not continue to observe the tunnel, but walked forward. The secret passages under the Red Keep are like a spider web, interlaced in an orderly manner. After passing through the stone tunnel and some earth holes supported by wood for about 20 minutes, the little boy finally stopped and pointed to the top of his head to Robb. Robb looked up and saw a square tunnel 70 centimeters wide above his head. A row of iron handles started from the tunnel wall and extended upward into the darkness. This overhead tunnel should be very long. With the dim light of the small oil lamp, you can't see the end at all. Robb didn't hesitate when he came here. Just when he was about to take action, the little boy pulled the edge of his black robe, bent his fingers, and knocked on the door twice, 3 times in a row. This should be the signal given by Varys. Robb nodded, grabbed the iron handle and climbed up. Dark, depressed, irritable. Humans all like light. After climbing in the narrow and dark tunnel for nearly 10 minutes, Robb's heart continued to have negative emotions. Suppressing these negative emotions, Robb climbed up again for a few minutes, and his hand finally touched an iron cover above. Dong dong dong, dong dong dong. Squeak. According to the signal taught by the little boy, after knocking on the iron cover opened with a slight sound, and a bright light made Robb's eyes, which had been in darkness, a little stinging. Lord Robb, welcome to the Prime Minister's tower. Robb's eyes had not yet opened, and Varys' gentle voice came to his ears. He closed his eyes and waited for a while. When he opened them, his eyes finally adapted to the light. Varys was seen with a full beard, wearing a black jailer uniform, with a long sword on his waist and a burning torch in his hand, smiling at him. Robb crawled out of the tunnel in 2 steps, stood up, and asked Varys, Lord Varys, every time I see you, you are in a different disguise. By the way, why are we in the tower of the Prime Minister instead of the Black Prison? Lord Robb, you are really eager to see Lord Eddard. The secret passage can only enter the tower of the Prime Minister from outside the city, and the secret passage to the Black Prison is also inside this tower of the Prime Minister. What are you waiting for? Let's go. Hearing Varys' answer, Robb frowned and said immediately, well, please follow me. Seeing Robb so anxious, Varys shook his head, turned around and led the way for him. They were now in the bedroom of the Tower of the Prime Minister, and walked through the corridor to the meeting hall of the Tower of the Prime Minister. The area of the meeting hall is not very large, and the golden framed round windows around are all carved with crowned stags. The meat carpet, also with a crowned stag, covered the entire hall. In the middle of the hall stood a long dark red table, with 7 high-backed wooden chairs beside it. Varys took out a dagger from his bosom, lifted the carpet beside the dark red table, and gently pried a stone slab underneath, revealing a new secret passage in front of Robb. Chapter 69, Black Prison. The Red Castle dungeon has 4 floors. The top floor, which is the first floor, has narrow and tall windows, and is used to imprison some common criminals. The second floor is a small single cell, which is used to imprison noble captives. Because it is underground, torches are always burning in the hall of the second floor. The light of the torches shines through the bars and illuminates these single cells. The third floor is a cell without windows and torches. They have solid wooden doors, and the criminals in them are always imprisoned in the dark. Therefore, they are called black cells. The most evil and dangerous criminals are imprisoned in the black cell, because the jailers do not care about their lives at all. These criminals are either starved to death, thirsty to death, frozen to death, or tortured to madness by the endless darkness. Snap. An empty cell in the black cell was opened, and the blazing torch tore open the endless darkness in the black cell. Shishu ishu. The appearance of this light made a series of chain moving sounds in the black cell. Hiss. Little pretty boy, come in quickly. I'll make you feel great. Robb followed Varys in the corridor of the black prison. In the cells on the left and right, 2 ugly criminals put their faces against the small window of the wooden door and made noises at Robb. TSK, TSK, interesting. Someone has 2 faces. Someone should serve the 1,000-faced god. Varys had long been accustomed to the noise of these criminals and walked quickly in front, but a sentence spoken in a cell made Robb stop. He turned his head and saw a man with red and white hair and a handsome face, looking at him with a smile. Jaqen H'ghar, a member of the Faceless Men of Bravos. It was he who helped Arya and led her on the path of the Faceless Men. Robb would definitely not forget this well-known character from the original drama. Cough. Varys in front, saw Robb standing there, and coughed loudly in a hoarse voice to remind him. Seeing his father Eddard was the most important thing now. Robb did not talk to Jaqen, but walked forward and continued to follow Varys. Jaqen's eyes were fixed on Robb's back until the torchlight disappeared and his smiling face disappeared into the darkness again. Click. Varys opened the cell in the innermost layer of the black cell with a key. Robb took the torch he handed over and was about to walk into the cell. Varys stretched out a hand to stop Robb and said to him in a hoarse voice, "At dawn, the jailers will start to change shifts from the first floor. You probably have half an hourglass of time. You are worried that I will stay too long and can't help but take action. So you chose this time. Don't worry, I will leave as soon as I finish my words. Please come in." Varys nodded and looked at Robb's hand, making an invitation gesture. Click. After Robb entered the room, Varys closed the wooden door. Robb was not worried at all. Varys invited him into the trap and locked him in the cell directly. For him, who was carrying ice and had amazing arm strength, this wooden door was just a thicker wooden board. The innermost cell was unusually spacious, dark and damp, with moss growing on the bluestone walls. Robb walked around to corners with a torch and finally saw the familiar figure resting with his knees hugged. "Father," Robb called softly with a trembling voice. Hearing the voice in his ear, Eddard suddenly raised his head, shielded the torchlight with the back of his hand, looked at Robb in disbelief, and asked in a hoarse voice, "Robb, how? You were also arrested and thrown into the dark cell?" "No, Lord Varys brought me in." "Father, you have suffered." Robb shook his head, looked at Eddard's current appearance, and said with some heartache. In Robb's memory, Eddard was always the mighty, serious, and stubborn father. But now his face was pale and haggard, his eyes were dark, and it could be seen that he was worried in the past few days and had not rested at all. His hands and feet were shackled, but fortunately in this life, he was not pierced in the right leg by the Lannister soldiers and suffered less pain. "Hurry up, go out and find your sisters. Take them and return to the north immediately." As if he was sure that it was not his dream, Eddard reacted and immediately pointed in the direction of the cell door and said to Robb, "I will, father, but I will also take you back to Winterfell. I can't go back." Hearing Robb's words, Eddard shook his head and suddenly remembered that Robb was brought in by Varys. He continued, "Varys asked you to persuade me to admit treason? Admit that Joffrey is Robert's legitimate heir?" "Yes, father. Lord Varys wants me to persuade you so." Robb looked at Eddard and a disappointed expression on his face when he heard the answer. He continued, "But I don't intend to do that. When I knew you had stepped down as Hand of the King, I was worried that something might happen in King's Landing, so I came here disguised as a caravan. I have made arrangements for Winterfell, and as long as the news of your imprisonment is passed back, we will take action immediately. Now, Mother should have been gathering all the vassals, and after gathering tens of thousands of northern troops, they will go straight south. Start a war? No, Robb, you are still a child. You don't understand the horror of war. Listen to me. Go out and find your sisters, and take them back to the north." As soon as Eddard heard Robb's words, he immediately shook his head at him, and answered in a serious tone, "Father, I'm a child in your eyes. But I'm the hero who overthrew the Targaryen dynasty, the Warden of the North, the Duke of Winterfell, and the child of Eddard Stark. Robb Bolton was instigated by Tywin Lannister to deliberately disrupt and destroy the order in the North, and wanted to cut off the foundation of our Stark family. A month ago, I launched a war against the Bolton family, captured the Dreadfort, and executed Robb Bolton." Robb looked at Eddard with firm eyes and directly told him what he had done during Eddard's absence. "Kate, you wrote to me and said that you defeated Robb Bolton. I was very worried that you would be injured. Be decisive and don't give the other party a chance to turn the tables. In this regard, I'm not as good as you." Eddard listened to Robb's story quietly, with a smile on his face, and praised Robb directly. After he finished speaking, his eyes wandered, as if he was recalling the past. At the same time, he continued to speak. "Once, Robb Bolton responded to my call and fought alongside me, but now, he has been executed by you. Time flies so fast, and before we know it, our generation has grown old or died. Heh, especially that bastard Robert, who died at the hands of a prostitute and left me with a mess. Father, as far as I know, your adopted father, Lord Arryn, was poisoned and murdered by his wife, mother sister, Lysa Arryn, and Baelish. And the death of his majesty Robert seemed normal, but it was actually Cersei who did it behind the scenes. Hearing Eddard talking about this topic, there was nothing to hide at this time, and Robb directly laid out the so-called secret. Thanks to Kyan Zirin for the 1500 point reward and the Will of the Cinder King for the 200 point reward. Thanks to Kyan Zirin, Gongi, Bookmat 201804152025525593, and Sped007 for their monthly votes. At the same time, thanks to all the big guys who voted for recommendations and followed the reading every day. Thank you for your support. Chapter 70 Father and Son. Bang. Shuss. Shuss. After hearing Robb's words, Eddard suddenly slammed his fists on the wooden floor of the black cell, and the chains on his body made a loud noise due to his fierce movements. These bastards. Seeing his father pounding the ground in a somewhat inappropriate manner, Robb knew that he was venting all the negative emotions that he had suppressed in his heart since he came to King's Landing and was imprisoned in the black cell. After venting for a while, Eddard's face gradually calmed down. He took a deep breath and said, Baelish did this to cause a war between us Starks and Lannister. Go back and tell Kate about this, and ask her to contact your grandfather, Lord Hoster Tully. Then, unite with the Duke of Dragonstone, Stannis Baratheon, to fight against Lannister, and help him ascend the Iron Throne. After listening to Eddard's arrangements silently, Robb shook his head, looked at Eddard firmly, and said in a decisive tone, Father, through your teachings, I will never kneel to anyone again. Never. Robb, you. Hearing Robb's resolute tone, Eddard's face showed astonishment, and he pointed at his son with his right hand. He wanted to teach Robb a lesson with the doctrines of loyalty and honor that he had firmly believed in for decades. But seeing the light in his eyes, Eddard, who had suffered a series of blows during this period, suddenly lowered his right hand in a disheartened manner and whispered, I suddenly understood a lot of things when I came to King's Landing this time. That day in the royal garden, Baelish pointed out to me everyone's spies, but I knew nothing. At the beginning, you were right to apply to me in Winterfell to establish an intelligence agency. During this period, I had no intelligence, and I was like a blind man, being led into a trap step by Baelish. Eddard looked at Robb who was listening to him quietly, took a breath, and continued, I can't do anything if I leave Winterfell and the vassals who trust me. In King's Landing, I'm restrained by various forces everywhere. Even if I'm the hand of the king, what does it matter? They obeyed my orders and did things for me because of Robert behind me. Now that Robert is dead, his will has been torn into waste paper by Cersei. Joffrey, the illegitimate son born from her incest with Jaime, is sitting on the Iron Throne, but I'm charged with treason and waiting to die here. Father, you will not die. I promised Lord Varys that I could not rescue you now. I will come to the Black Prison again at noon today to rescue you. Don't worry, I have arranged all the retreat routes. After Eddard finished speaking, Robb immediately spoke and told him the purpose of his visit. Escape from King's Landing. Robb, I believe you can take me out of King's Landing. But after I escape, the charge of treason will surely be turned into reality by the Lannisters. I, Eddard Stark, will from now on be a sinner who abandons my monarch, betrays my best friend, and commits treason. The Stark family will also bear these charges from now on. The honor of my life, the honor of the Stark family, has all been tarnished, just to exchange for me, to live a few more years in endless guilt. If so, after I die, how can I face the ancestors of the Stark family in the crypts of Winterfell? As soon as Eddard finished speaking, he stretched out his hand to stop Robb, who opened his mouth to speak and continued in a firm tone. Robb, go out and take your sisters back to Winterfell. Send troops to guard the abandoned fortress of Moat Cailin, and then guard White Harbor, so that the Lannisters will not be able to force their way into the north. I have fallen into this situation now, because of my foolish kindness and the honor I insisted on. Robb, you are stronger than me. You must protect your mother and your brothers and sisters. If possible, I will wait for you here to clear my name of treason and let me out through legal means. Father. Knock, knock, knock. Robb was about to continue to persuade, but there was a continuous knock on the wooden door of the prison. This was Varys reminding him that the time was up. No more talking. Go out and find your sisters. Eddard, who also understood the meaning of the knock, turned his head away from Robb and waved him to go out quickly. Knowing that he couldn't explain his stubborn father to him for a while, Robb had to grit his teeth and turned to walk out of the cell. Hearing Robb's footsteps leaving, Eddard turned his head and looked at his back with reluctance. As the light of the torch faded away, the cell was once again shrouded in endless darkness. Bang! The cell was closed heavily, and in the darkness, a sigh full of emotions came. Alas. Silly boy, even if I can abandon my lifelong honor and flee back to the north, what shall I do when I face you who refuses to bend your knees? The north is your north now. Cat, I promised at that time that I would come back to see you soon. Sorry, I have to break my promise. Robb did not know what his father Eddard was thinking. As soon as he walked out of the cell, Varys, with an anxious look on his face, put on the hood of his jailer's uniform and urged him, hurry up, the jailer who will take over the shift should be here soon. Robb nodded and followed him to the secret passage in the black cell. Someone will come out from here, let's talk next time we meet. When he was about to pass by Jaqen's cell, he, who had been waiting for a long time, said to Robb with a smile on his face. Robb did not have time to pay attention to him and walked straight past his cell in silence. Creak. As soon as Robb entered the secret passage of the empty cell in the black cell, Varys closed the wooden door of the cell. At this time, the door in front of the black cell was opened from the outside. A burly jailer wearing a prison uniform and holding a torch walked in. Logan, it's time to change shifts. As soon as the burly jailer entered the door, he saw Varys in the corridor of the black cell and shouted to him. Yes, I know. Here's the key. Varys answered in a hoarse voice, handed the cell key in his hand to the burly jailer, and walked out of the black cell past him. Aha. After closing the door of the black cell, the burly jailer yawned heavily. He played with the maid all night last night, so he could use the boring job of guarding the black cell to make up for his sleep. Hey, big guy. Do you want to know a secret? Jaqen stretched out his right hand from the small window of the cell and called to the burly jailer. Put your hand in, otherwise, you can only use the other hand to comfort yourself in the future. Seeing that the criminal who had been very quiet and obedient during this period had abnormal behavior, the burly jailer took out a long sword from his waist and said to Jaqen, this is a secret worth at least dozens of gold dragons. You see, I have one of them in my hand. Jaqen said, and stretched out his right hand in the cell, and a gold dragon appeared like a magic trick. Looking at the charming golden dragon in his hand under the torchlight, the burly jailer's eyes shone with greed. He walked towards Jaqen's cell and said loudly, if you dare to lie to me, you're dead. The burly jailer came to Jaqen's cell, stuck the torch in his hand into the wall, held the sword in his right hand, and reached out with his left hand to take the golden dragon in his hand. When the burly jailer took the golden dragon from Jaqen, he felt that his left palm seemed to be bitten by something, and there was a slight tingling sensation. However, he was full of joy. After confirming that the golden dragon in his hand was genuine, he didn't care. He put his face close to the small window of the cell and asked anxiously, tell me quickly, what's the secret? Chapter 71 Sansa. Stone scorpion venom, a poison from Essos. It is very rare, and a small bottle is worth dozens of gold royals. It enters the human body through the blood, and within a few minutes, symptoms of accelerated heartbeat will appear. This symptom worsens over time, and in the end, the poisoned person's heart will burst due to excessive beating. The burly jailer heard Jaqen inexplicably giving him knowledge about poisons, and he said impatiently, what are you saying? That makes people incomprehensible? I just want to know, besides the gold royal in your hand, what else is there? The rest? It's already flowing in your body. Jaqen smiled and pointed at the burly jailer. In my body. When the burly jailer heard his words, he suddenly realized that the poison he just mentioned, which enters the body through the blood, came to his mind. The stinging feeling of being stung by the palm when he took the gold dragon just now appeared in his mind. He immediately spread out his left hand and saw a green bean-sized red dot appear in the palm of his hand. The burly jailer suddenly felt his heart beating rapidly, which was completely consistent with the symptoms of poisoning. Ah. You poisoned me. Give me the antidote. The antidote is here. Come in and get it. Looking at the burly jailer who reached his hand into the cell, Jaqen smiled and slowly stepped back a few steps, disappearing into the darkness of the cell. The burly jailer, who was anxious in his heart, didn't even think about it. He reached his hand back from the small window, took out the cell key on his body, opened the wooden door of the cell directly, and walked in with a long sword in his hand. Ah! Then, a quick scream sounded as it should. After a while, the burly jailer walked out of the cell. After locking the wooden door of the cell, he said to himself, where can there be such a poison? Someone is too nervous, and his heartbeat must be accelerated. Robb passed through the secret passage and soon returned to the Prime Minister's tower. When he came out of the secret passage, the morning sun had risen from the east, illuminating the entire Westeros continent. He did not follow Varys' instructions and go directly to the bedroom of the Prime Minister's tower and leave the Red Keep through the secret passage. Instead, he stood by the windowsill of the main hall of the Prime Minister's tower, carefully observing the towering Meagher's tower not far away. Sansa is there. Robb did not act rashly. The Red Keep is currently heavily guarded, not to mention a large number of gold cloaks. The King's Guard led by Barristan Selmy alone is not something that can be easily dealt with. Although fearless Barristan is old, he is equivalent to Lion Pio in Westeros, and he is strong even with age. In addition, Jaime's superb swordsmanship. If he faces the two of them alone with a single sword, even Robb, whose physique has greatly improved, may not even have a chance to escape. As the sun rose higher and higher, the Red Keep began to see the movement of large-scale gold cloaks. He saw that nearly half of the gold cloaks were withdrawn from the Red Keep. Robb knew that they were either here to search him, or to maintain order at the king's funeral today. Seeing the opportunity, he quietly moved towards the bottom floor of the Prime Minister's tower. The bottom floor of the Prime Minister's tower is connected to Meagher's tower. Since no one lives there, there are no gold cloaks guarding it. However, Robb observed from the second floor staircase that a patrolling gold cloak slowly walked out of the connection between Meagher's tower and the Prime Minister's hall. He walked to the center of the hall on the bottom floor of the Prime Minister's tower, and then turned back again. Seeing the gold cloak walking back to Meagher's tower, Robb took the opportunity to rush from the second floor staircase to the connection on the bottom floor, holding his breath and waiting for the gold cloak to patrol again. Snap, snap. The patrolling gold cloak slowly walked towards the Prime Minister's tower. When he just stepped into the Prime Minister's tower, a gloved black hand suddenly stretched out from the right side, strangled his neck, and dragged him in with a powerful force that he could not resist at all. Robb's left elbow was around the neck of the gold cloak, making it difficult for him to cry for help. He grabbed the gold cloak's chin with his right hand, and then twisted it to the left. The golden robe's neck subconsciously stretched to the right, trying to hinder Robb's movement. Feeling the resistance from his right hand, Robb suddenly changed direction, grabbed his chin, and twisted it to the right. Crack. The resistance of the golden robe's neck twisting to the right in order to resist Robb instantly turned into a thrust, superimposed with the strength of Robb's right hand. It easily broke his trachea, and at the same time, the powerful force twisted his spine. After a while, Robb hid the corpse and ice in the cabinet in the hall, put on a golden robe, and went to Meagher's holdfast openly. As Robb expected, the guards in Meagher's holdfast were much less. Wearing a golden robe and helmet, he walked around in Meagher's holdfast with his head down, and did not attract the attention of the guards at all. When he reached the inner staircase of Meagher's holdfast, Robb looked around, and went straight upstairs. Just after passing the second floor, and preparing to go to the third floor, suddenly, there was a sound of footsteps coming downstairs. Robb heard the voice and immediately retreated to the second floor. He quietly entered an empty room next to the stairs, and hid behind the door. "Dog, bring my fiancé down before you leave. There must be loud crying at my father's funeral." Joffrey, dressed in a golden royal casual dress, walked down the stairs, and told the hound what to do. Hearing his voice, Robb behind the door slowly reached for the hilt of the standard longsword at his waist. "Your Majesty, it's getting late. Your formal dress should be ready," an old and powerful voice said after Joffrey finished speaking. "Well, dog, let's change clothes first, and remember what I told you later. As you command." Hearing the old voice, Robb knew that it should be Barristan the Fearless. He stopped what he was doing, concentrated his breath, and hid behind the door of the room. Joffrey and his group hurried down the stairs without even thinking about checking the rooms on the second floor. After they walked away, Robb came out carefully and went upstairs again. In the upper area of Meagher's Holdfast, Sansa, who was tall and beautiful, walked back and forth in the guest room, where she was temporarily staying, with a worried look on her face. Just now, she asked Joffrey for mercy for her father Eddard. Joffrey responded with sarcastic words again. At this time, she deeply felt that she had no status at all without her father's support. Creak. The door was opened, and a golden robe quickly entered the room and closed the door again. Who are you? What do you want to do? Don't come over. I'm the daughter of the King's Hand. Looking at this suspicious golden robe, Sansa was frightened and stepped back repeatedly and threatened. Hearing his sister's familiar voice, Robb took off his helmet and said softly, "Sansa, it's me. Brother, why are you here?" In Winterfell, Sansa, who always called Robb by his name directly, called him brother this time with surprise. Then she immediately threw herself into Robb's arms like a swallow flying into the forest. "Whoa, brother, father has been taken to the dungeon. Septa Mordane did it for me." Sansa, who had been suppressing herself for the past few days, since Eddard was captured, couldn't help crying when she saw her own brother. He stretched out his left hand to embrace Sansa, patted her thick red hair with his right hand, and comforted her. "Sansa, don't cry. Let's go home." Thanks to Wuri Wang Zhi, Wild Gorilla, Chen Shui Shui for voting for the monthly ticket. At the same time, thanks to all the big guys who voted for the recommendation and followed the reading every day. Thank you for your support. PS. Phew. Tomorrow will be the climax of this plot. I hope to make all readers feel refreshed. These days I look at the names of the big guys who voted every day. Thank you. It's really because of you that I can stick to it. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 72 Wolf Howl. What? Sansa is missing? The guards downstairs didn't see her walk out of Meagher's Holdfast. Joffrey, who was riding on a white horse and preparing to set off, frowned and asked when he heard the Hound coming to report in a hurry. "Yes, your majesty." "Joe, let the guards keep a close watch on the entrance and exit of Meagher's Holdfast. Sansa can't run away. Now, your father's funeral is waiting for the nobles of all sizes. We can't delay." Cersei, who was sitting in a sedan chair next to Joffrey, thought for a moment and suggested to him, "Well, let's do it. Since my fiancé wants to play hide and seek, then, dog, you stay and find her for me. When I come back, I'll play with her." Joffrey's mouth curled up a wicked smile, gave the Hound instructions, and then turned around and ordered, "Let's go." At his command, the mighty procession began to march out from the inner gate of the Red Keep. Varys, who was in the procession, had a solemn expression on his face. He had guessed that Sansa's disappearance must have something to do with Robb. Baelish looked back at Meagher's Holdfast thoughtfully, then rode his horse to follow the team. In Meagher's Holdfast, in addition to the royal chamber, there is also a spacious and bright ballroom. The area of this ballroom is enough to accommodate hundreds of people. There is a corridor above the ballroom, and huge arched windows are arranged on the walls of the corridor. At the same time, there are many polished silver mirrors on the walls below, so that the sunlight outside the castle can be refracted through the arched windows to the entire ballroom. There are many gorgeous carvings on the walls and pilasters of the ballroom, which are figures, dragons, stags, etc. Behind a pilaster, carved with a crown and stag, Robb led Sansa, and hid behind it for a long time. Due to the large-scale search in King's Landing, the king's funeral was guarded more strictly. The garrison in the Red Castle can be said to have dropped to the lowest level in history. When Meagher's Holdfast was first built, it was positioned as a square fortress, not only with a wide area, but also with many corners where people could hide. Therefore, even though the Hound was leading a team of gold cloak guards to search separately, they did not find the ballroom for a while. Robb looked up at the sun hanging high in the sky outside the arched window, and he murmured, "It's time." "Brother, what time is it?" Sansa, who was very close, heard the whisper and asked. Robb did not answer, but smiled and pointed to his ears, signaling Sansa to listen carefully. As early as the Dreadfort War, Bloodwind could track the Bolton family scout cavalry and then convey general information to Robb from a distance. As Bloodwind continued to grow, the scope of their close connection expanded. While answering Sansa, Robb sent out his thoughts to his loyal partner, who was closely connected with him outside King's Landing. Raw. Bloodwind. Outside the Gate of the Gods, 3 or 4 kilometers away from the city gate, there is an ordinary inn. At this moment, this inn was not ordinary at all, because it was surrounded by 70 to 80 Lannister soldiers. Torhan and 2 Winterfell cavalrymen had long been controlled by Lannister. The 3 of them had their hands tied tightly with ropes and were suspended in the inn's warehouse. Clang, clang, clang. In the yard behind the inn, a special carriage that was much larger than an ordinary carriage began to shake from side to side and made a sound of metal collision. On the tiled roof of the inn's bungalow, a row of archers with crossbows in their hands were lying on the left and right. When they heard the strange sound of the special carriage, they looked at each other, and some nervously aimed their crossbows at the carriage's cargo compartment. Clang, 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 creak, creak. The shaking of the special carriage became more and more severe, and at the same time, the collision sound became more and more frequent. Bang. The carriage cargo box, which finally couldn't hold up, was directly smashed from the inside out, and various iron sheets and wooden fragments fell to the ground. Under the sunlight of the midday sun, a giant armored wolf with dazzling metallic light all over its body appeared on the carriage without the shelter of the cargo compartment. The armor of this giant armored wolf is composed of thick blocky metal plates, which are connected by rivets. There is no pattern on the armor, which looks a little rough, but also has a more primitive sense of power. Except for the eyes, the narrow wolf mouth, and the exposed limbs and tail, the whole body of the giant wolf is protected by armor. Trapped in the dark and sealed carriage with only the feeding port for nearly half a month, Bloodwind, who can finally stretch his whole body and move freely, is full of excitement. However, the excited Bloodwind did not forget the instructions conveyed to him by Robb. It stepped on the front of the carriage with its 2 front feet, took a deep breath of air, and then tightened its abdomen. Then, it looked up to the sky and let out a long wolf howl that could shake the entire King's Landing. Abu. This penetrating wolf howl spread quickly through the air, and in an instant, everyone in King's Landing, as long as they were not deaf, could hear it. In King's Landing, in front of the Great Sept of Bela, the entire sept was decorated with black-crowned stag banners and corresponding decorations. The High Septarch stood on the stone steps in front of the Great Sept, and the dignitaries in King's Landing stood on the left and right of these dozens of steps according to their status, leaving the middle position for Joffrey and others. Cersei was wearing a blood-red long dress today, wearing gorgeous jewelry decorations. Looking at her expression, it didn't seem like she was attending her husband's funeral, but more like attending a wedding banquet. Joffrey was wearing a decent black noble dress, a black cloak with a crowned stag on the back, and holding the golden lion sword at his waist. Apart from anything else, this appearance made the noble women present all shine, and they talked about him quietly. Joffrey stepped onto the stone steps, followed by Cersei, Baelish, Varys, Basil and other ministers. Barristan, Jaime, Meryn Trent and other king's goods protected them. Abu. When the bloody wolf howl reached here, at that moment, everyone seemed to be immobilized, all movement stopped, and they fell into silence. Ah. It's so scary. What's that sound? A monster? It sounds like a wolf howling. Impossible. What kind of wolf would howl so loudly? A wolf with dragon blood. After the dignitaries on the stairs reacted, they immediately started to discuss, like a noisy vegetable market. Uncle Jaime, what is that? Joffrey, who was frightened and a little weak in the knees, asked Jaime with a pale face. Jaime turned his head to the direction of the Gate of the Gods, where the sound came from, and said in a positive tone, "This is Robb Stark's direwolf. Can all direwolves make such a sound? Or is it only Robb Stark's direwolf?" Cersei frowned and asked Jaime. Jaime shook his head and answered thoughtfully, "I don't know, but this wolf must be special to make such a cry. If I'm not mistaken, something must have gone wrong at the inn. The spy once told me that, although the direwolf is large, it can be killed. In the Battle of the Dreadfort, it was shot by ordinary bows and arrows, and was seriously injured. If the crossbowmen are ranged, can't do anything to this direwolf. After thinking for a while, Jaime immediately turned to Cersei and said, "You continue to hold the funeral ceremony in the Great Sept of Baelor, and I will take people to help." Cersei nodded, pulled Joffrey, who was still panicking, and stepped onto the stairs. Except for Jaime, the other king's guards followed closely behind. "You, follow me." Jaime called 3 teams of gold cloaks, and walked towards the street on the left side of the Great Sept of Baelor. "Lord Jaime, that's the direction of the Alchemists Guild." A captain in gold cloaks following behind Jaime saw that he was going in the wrong direction and warned him. "Shut up, just follow me." Steel Street, Mop Blacksmith Shop. Gendry, wearing a leather waistcoat, was swinging a hammer with all his might, hitting the red-hot iron in his hand, sparks flying. Abu! The wolf howl that shook King's Landing was heard. Gendry was stunned at first, then dropped the things in his hand with excitement. He turned around and picked up a fine horn helmet and a long-arm hammer on the table, and said to himself excitedly, "The signal is coming." Chapter 73 Hunting. Hey, now the gold cloaks are in the custody of Lord Baelish. He is the finance minister of King's Landing, so he is particularly interested in gold dragons. However, 50 gold dragons are still too few, and may not be enough to impress him, and let me get promoted. On the south tower outside the Red Castle, Grey stood beside Clay, looking at the sparkling Blackwater River under the cliff, and said meaningfully, "Abu." Clay, who was a little impatient with his entanglement, was about to speak to deal with it, when he heard the long and loud wolf howl. On the tower, the 4 Clays who had stood in position in advance looked at each other, immediately pulled out daggers from their waists, and rushed towards Blake, Darth and other 5 gold cloaks who were stunned by the wolf howl. The 4 Clays who were prepared in advance did not let them react at all, and directly cut the throats of the 5 people, and blood immediately flowed on the stone slabs of the tower. "Damn it. Clem, didn't you say that you came to stand guard today, just to release the people quietly? Why did you kill people? How can I explain this to my superiors later?" When Grey reacted, the 5 golden robes under his command were already lying on the ground. He stepped forward and grabbed Clay's sleeve, questioning loudly, "Since I killed people, of course I have already thought about it for you." Hearing his question, Clay answered calmly. As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around abruptly, and the sharp dagger instantly wiped across Grey's throat. Dead people don't need to explain. Looking at Grey, who was covering his neck with one hand and pointing at himself with the other, Clay shook his head and said, reaching out from his arms, he took out the bag of gold dragons, and Clay pushed him, and Grey fell from the South City Tower to the Blackwater River under the cliff. "You two stay here to deal with the bodies and act as guards, and you come with me to the south gate of the Red Keep." Clay gave a simple order and followed the plan, walking along the wall of the south tower towards the south gate of the Red Keep. King's Landing, a small alley between Flower Street and Flea Bottom. Arya, with a face full of dirt and a foul smell, was curled up under the eaves of a house and sleeping like a little beggar. Yesterday, a large number of gold cloaks and Lannister soldiers turned the Flea Bottom upside down. Arya, who thought the gold cloaks were coming to catch her, was agile and got into the dirty sewer to avoid the search. Abu! A familiar wolf howl suddenly woke her up from her sleep. Shaking her head, Arya, who gradually woke up, stretched out her hand and pinched her thigh. The pain in her thigh told her that she was not dreaming, so she immediately got up and ran towards the source of the sound. In the past, when Bloodwind first appeared in front of them in Winterfell, it was a wolf howl, so she immediately recognized that it was Bloodwind's voice. However, this time the wolf howl was countless times louder than that time. What is a killer? It is a trick that no one knows except oneself, and it can catch people off guard. A killer move. This wolf armor that was secretly customized for Bloodwind was not known to anyone, except the blacksmith of Winterfell and Robb, who made it. When resting at the south corner in near the king's territory, Robb personally got on the carriage to appease Bloodwind. In fact, to open the secret compartment in the special carriage, take it out, and equip it with this wolf armor. In Robb's plan, after Bloodwind, who has far more attributes than a normal direwolf, puts on this wolf armor, it can be said that it is the most deadly killer besides dragons and wildfires. The 3 people who stayed at the inn, Torhan, were worried that Bloodwind would lose control because Robb was not there. They did not dare to open the carriage cargo compartment at all, but only fed it regularly every day. And the Lannister soldiers who surrounded the inn a few days ago were told that there was a direwolf inside. But because the sealed special carriage was pitch black, it was impossible to see the situation inside at the feeding port. Moreover, the Lannister soldiers had no intention of feeding Bloodwind these days. Therefore, everyone in the backyard of the inn was shocked when they saw Bloodwind wrapped in wolf armor. The 2 horses pulling the carriage in front of the special carriage were frightened by Bloodwind's wolf howl and fell to the ground. One of the less courageous horses foamed at the mouth and kept urinating and defecating under its buttocks. It was almost scared to death by Bloodwind's wolf howl. Whoosh, 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 ding, ding, ding. When this huge ice wolf covered in shining armor calmed down from the shock and panic, the crossbowman who reacted did not think twice and pulled the trigger of the crossbow. Bloodwind, who had a premonition of danger, used his strong limbs to jump off the carriage. Some of the crossbow arrows were easily dodged by it, and some of them hit the metal armor of Bloodwind, making a crisp sound. After being locked up for more than half a month, the hungry Bloodwind dodged the crossbow shooting and immediately took a hunting posture ready to go. After shooting a wave of crossbow arrows, seeing that Bloodwind was not hurt at all, the crossbowman hurriedly picked up the lamb leg crowbar beside them, restringed the crossbow, and loaded the arrows. The wolf armor on Bloodwind weighed more than 180 kilograms. For Bloodwind, whose attributes were now maximumed out, the weight of the wolf armor was completely within its load-bearing range. Except for a slight impact on speed, there was no discomfort. Therefore, when the crossbowman reloaded, Bloodwind would not foolishly wait for them there. Bang! Wearing wolf armor, Bloodwind, like a heavy tank, broke through the door and entered a hotel room. Its ears twitched twice, and it suddenly jumped up. Its huge wolf head smashed through the roof of the guest room, and its mouth bit directly the legs of a crossbowman on the roof, pulling him down. Ah! Ah! Help! Ah! On the roof of the hotel, 19 crossbowmen looked at the hole in the roof, listened to the short but heartbreaking screams inside, and fell into dead silence. Bang! A huge and terrifying figure jumped high from the hole in the house. Bloodwind, who wanted to jump onto the roof, fell heavily into another room due to his own weight, carrying the 2 crossbowmen next to the hole. Ah! No, no, this is a monster, run. Listening to the shrill screams of his companions in the terrifying hole that was smashed, a crossbowman roared, lost his mind, and madly jumped from the roof to the backyard of the small hotel. Crack. Jumping directly from this height, the crossbowman's legs were instantly broken and twisted, but he screamed while grabbing the ground with both hands and struggling to crawl out of the yard. The other crossbowmen on the roof also collapsed, and they hurriedly crawled towards the stairs on the edge of the roof. Bang! Ah! The sound of them crawling on the roof was like navigation positioning to Zufeng. A roof was broken, and another crossbowman was dragged into the hole with a scream. Don't move. This monster is listening to the sound of our crawling. Whoever crawls again will die. At this time, a crossbowman with a smart mind stopped crawling and shouted loudly to his companions. Hearing his voice, the surviving crossbowman stopped crawling and stayed where they were stiffly. The crossbowman bent his legs and slowly stood up. In a half squat position, he lifted a tile from the roof and threw it 2 meters in front of him. At the same time, he aimed the strung crossbow forward. Bang! Ding! A huge wolf head broke through the roof and opened its mouth to bite the place where the tile fell. The crossbowman fired the crossbow in his hand, but because the flying tiles blocked his vision, his arrow did not hit the giant wolf's eyes, but hit the armor covering the wolf's head. He quickly took off the lamb leg crowbar at his waist, buckled the string again, and then repeated the trick, and threw another tile forward. Bang! Puff! A black shadow broke through the roof, and the crossbowman pulled the trigger, and the crossbow arrow accurately hit the black shadow, making a muffled sound of the arrow entering the flesh. Seeing that the crossbow arrow hit accurately, the crossbowman was about to smile, and the black shadow fell on the roof. He looked closely and saw that it was half of his companion's body that had been bitten horribly. Looking at the half body, the crossbowman seemed to hear something, slowly lowered his head to look at his feet, and let out a bitter smile. Ha! So damn smart. Ah. The roof was broken, and the crossbowman disappeared in an instant. Thanks to Ukaka for the reward, Zangu Vodka, Finkio Oyibo, 0 Northeast for the monthly votes. Thanks to all the people who voted for recommendations and read the book every day. Thank you for your support. P.S. There is an Easter egg chapter after this chapter, with a map of King's Landing and marked locations. Pictures will be posted in important chapters in the future. Thank you for your support. Chapter 74 Sander. Abu. The wolf howls that resounded throughout King's Landing also reached the Red Keep. In the Red Keep, all the gold-cloaked soldiers who were responsible for guarding and patrolling were stunned at first after hearing the wolf howls, and then they couldn't help but discuss in groups of 3 or 5. Brother, that's the cry of Bloodwind. When you said the time has come, do you mean the time for us to leave here? In the ballroom, seeing Robb just pointed at his ear, a familiar wolf howl was heard, and Sansa spoke. Well, let's go. Robb smiled and nodded to his sister, and then pulled her out from behind the wall pillar. Squeak. Robb and his sister just walked to the middle of the empty ballroom, and the red door of the ballroom was pushed open, and a tall figure appeared outside the door. This man was burly, only a little shorter than the mountain, with taut muscles all over his body. The right half of his face was very haggard, with sharp cheekbones and thick eyebrows and grey eyes. The left half of his face was rotten, and his ears were basically gone, leaving only a small black hole. Under the small black hole were large, twisted scars, covered with pock marks and pits. The Hound, Joffrey's loyal guard. Robb had dealt with him before in Winterfell, but he had never observed him seriously. At this moment, the Hound's face was indeed hard to look at directly, and ordinary people would be a little afraid just looking at him. Can you pretend not to see us? Knowing that the Hound had a hidden affection for Sansa, Robb did not take action directly, but asked softly. Clang. The Hound, wearing a dark mail armor, did not say much, and directly drew the long sword from his waist. However, he was obviously a little lenient. Not only did he not open his mouth to call other guards outside, but also closed the door of the ballroom. Robb pushed Sansa to the edge of the ballroom and also drew out the standard long sword from his waist. You should know that I stabbed the mountain. If it wasn't for the wrong timing, I could have killed him right away. Don't you hate your brother the most? Let us go. I can help you kill the mountain in the future. The Hound and Robb stood in the middle of the ballroom. Robb tilted his head and looked at him, smiling. Hearing Robb's words, the Hound's eyes flickered, and I don't know if he was a little tempted. However, the Hound, who was still loyal to Joffrey and Lannister at this time, held the sword in his right hand and stabbed Robb. Snap. Robb's right hand longsword was behind and arrived first, and the sword hit the tip of the Hound's longsword at 1/3 of the distance. The power of the Hound's longsword was not weak, but compared with Robb, it was still a bit behind. Robb's sword directly knocked his longsword off, making his next attack unable to connect. Come back to Winterfell with me. I can let you be Sansa's guard. Before the Hound continued to attack, Robb spoke to him again. Hearing Robb's words, the Hound's eyes could not help but glance at Sansa, who was standing at the edge of the ballroom. Seeing that he was distracted in the battle, Robb's right longsword aimed at his left shoulder and slashed vertically. Clang, clang, clang. As soon as Robb launched an attack with his longsword, the Hound immediately reacted and hurriedly raised his sword to block. Vertical slash, horizontal slash, downward slash. Robb's 3 consecutive swords were blocked one by one. Although it was a bit hasty, it was obvious that the Hound had a solid foundation in swordsmanship and his level was not low. After 3 consecutive swords were blocked, Robb suddenly used his left foot as the axis, turned his body to the right, and swept the long sword with his right hand. Clang, bang. The Hound held the sword with both hands, and with his backhand, he held the sword up right outside his left arm to block the sweep. But his left foot was suddenly attacked, and the whole person lost balance. The huge body fell sideways in the air, and fell heavily to the ground. It turned out that when Robb turned around and slashed horizontally, his right leg quietly attacked in parallel with the longsword. The Hound, who only blocked the longsword, was swept to the ground by Robb's right leg. The Hound fell hard this time. He shook his head and was about to get up, but the tip of the sword in Robb's hand, which was shining with cold light, was already against his throat. Do it. Looking down at the tip of the sword in front of his neck, the Hound closed his eyes and spoke to Robb. The long sword slowly moved away from his neck, and Robb said to him, "I admire your loyalty to the Lannisters, but don't be influenced by your Clegane family. You are not a dog, you are a human. You are Sandor Clegane. Finally, thank you for taking care of Sansa in King's Landing." After Robb finished speaking, he pulled Sansa, who came to his side, and walked out of the ballroom. Behind them, the Hound, who heard those words. Sandor had an inexplicable brilliance in his eyes. To some people, Sandor is an ugly bad man who kills people like crazy. But for Sansa, he is a knight who can protect her. In the original play, in the Battle of Blackwater River, Sandor, who was mentally broken by wildfire, fled and came to Sansa's room. He wanted to take Sansa away from King's Landing and return to Winterfell, but was rejected by Sansa. At that time, Sandor could actually do anything to Sansa, but he chose not to do so, but left silently. Therefore, Robb persuaded him verbally from the beginning that, if he could be recruited as his subordinate, he would definitely be a good fighting force. But then again, after Robb's continuous battles along the way, his combat awareness and swordsmanship have unknowingly grown to a very exaggerated level. Although he attacked, while Sandor was distracted, he could be taken down with just a few swords, which is not something that ordinary people can do. Robb pulled Sansa to the connection between Meagher's tower and the tower of the Prime Minister. When they met guards who could be avoided, they avoided them. Those who could not avoid became the dead souls under Robb's sword. More than 10 minutes later, Robb took Sansa to retrieve the ice in the hall of the Prime Minister's tower. Because of the sword fight with Sandor just now, he didn't have time to pay attention to the thoughts that Bloodwind sent in his mind. Now Robb finally had some free time, and he could feel the thoughts it had sent before. Full, delicious. Shaking his head speechlessly, Robb didn't want to know what snacks the greedy Bloodwind had found. He directly gave Bloodwind an order in his mind to come and join him. The two of them could sense each other's approximate location through the close connection in their hearts. Therefore, Robb didn't have to worry about Bloodwind getting lost. At the same time, Clay brought a family guard through the city wall and came to the south gate of the outer wall of the Red Castle. "Why are you here instead of guarding the south tower?" There were about 50 gold-cloaked guards at the south gate. One of the gold-cloaked captains looked at Clay and the other man walking from the south tower and asked loudly, "We have received an urgent order from Lord Baelish, notifying you to go to the Gate of the Gods for assistance." Clay had an anxious expression on his face, and while speaking, he took out a piece of order from his arms. The captain in the gold cloak took the order, examined it carefully, and said, "Well, it is indeed an order with the commander's seal. But if we leave, what should we do here? The two of us will guard here first, and our south tower guard will assign people to come here later. Go quickly. The north gate should have been notified, so we can't delay." Hearing the other party's question, Clay lied without changing his expression. He was not afraid that the other party would find out the flaws. The order was stamped with the real commander seal. Then, the Red Castle was in the southeast corner of King's Landing, and the Gate of the Gods was in the northwest. When they arrived and learned the truth, Clay and others had already evacuated safely in the time it took to go back and forth. Chapter 75 Impact. Crack, crack, crack. Bloodwind, who was biting a bone, felt the thought in his heart and immediately stopped biting with his red wolf mouth and raised his fluffy head. After identifying Robb's general direction, he nimbly crossed the broken limbs and arms on the ground and the tragic corpses and ran quickly towards the Gate of the Gods. When Bloodwind almost wiped out the crossbowmen on the roof, nearly 80 Lannister soldiers who were ambushed around the inn heard the screams in the backyard of the inn and finally reacted and came to surround them. But who knew that they would encounter Bloodwind, a monster wearing a full body of wolf armor. After a one-sided massacre, most of the Lannister soldiers were killed or injured, and only a dozen Lannister soldiers were left. The morale collapsed, and they dropped their weapons and crawled to escape. However, a Lannister soldier who remembered his duties, after escaping by chance, lit the pre-pile signal smoke, and the billowing black smoke went straight into the blue sky. The wolf armor was covered with blood and slash marks. Bloodwind, who was unscathed, did not chase the deserters. Instead, he stopped to fill his hungry stomach, which needed a lot of food. It is worth mentioning that, perhaps because he was too far away from Robb, the Lannister soldiers killed by Bloodwind did not emit a trace of red mist. After seeing the horrific scene outside, the owner and servants of the inn hurriedly covered their mouths tightly and hid in the cabinet, trembling all over, fearing that Bloodwind would find them. Fortunately, Torhan and 2 Winterfell cavalrymen escaped because of the death of Lannister soldiers and no one was guarding them. Torhan seized the opportunity, loosened the rope with his teeth, and struggled to get out. After he released the other 2 cavalrymen, because Bloodwind was killing people and Robb was not at the scene, they did not dare to approach at all. After Bloodwind left the backyard of the inn, the 3 of them took up their weapons, rode on the horses in the front yard of the inn, followed Bloodwind, and headed towards the Gate of the Gods. Ah. Monster. Run. Is this the wolf that just made the sound? It's too big. Could it have the blood of a dragon? Bloodwind was galloping on the King's Road. All those who saw it were tumbling and crawling, crying, and shouting in panic to avoid it. After it quickly moved away, some brave people looked at his back and began to discuss. In 4 or 5 minutes, Bloodwind had approached the Gate of the Gods in King's Landing. The guards under the gate saw its figure from afar. Dozens of golden robes holding kite shields and iron-headed spears in the front row and standard long swords in the back row were lining up in a tense formation. Quickly form a formation. Don't be afraid, that thing is just a big wolf cub. After blocking it, pay attention to use the spear to poke the place where its armor can't protect it, and the long sword to cut its limbs from below. Behind them, a captain of the guard loudly comforted them and taught them how to attack. But after he finished speaking, he swallowed a big mouthful of saliva and quietly hid behind the thick city gate, looking at the armored giant wolf that was getting closer and closer. Weighing about 800 kilograms, plus nearly 200 kilograms of wolf armor, he rushed towards the golden robes at the city gate at a speed of 60 to 70 kilometers per hour. In a blink of an eye, the bloody wind was like a speeding car, directly crashing into the group of golden robes who didn't know the height of the sky and the earth. Crack, crack, bang, bang. The 2 golden robes holding shields standing side by side in the front. At the moment of contact, the wolf armor with a strong impact force hit the kite shields in their hands. The golden robes holding shields couldn't bear the force, and the kite shield smashed their sternums backwards, and the chest cavity was obviously concave. At the same time, they were directly knocked high by the strong impact force. In the air, they could be seen spraying a lot of blood. Judging from the way they looked, they would definitely not survive. Clang, clang. Some of the golden robes mustered up their courage and used their spears to attack the huge body of Bloodwind, but they only scratched the thick wolf armor and the spears were bounced away, and they were also knocked away by Bloodwind. Wearing heavy wolf armor and fully increasing his speed, Bloodwind is simply not something that can be stopped by human power. Bang, bang, bang. Although blocked by the flesh and blood of the golden robes, Bloodwind's speed dropped slightly, but with enough impact force, it plowed a bloody passage in the golden robe formation. Bloodwind, which crashed straight through the golden robe army formation, went straight to the red castle with the newly added bright red bloodstains on the wolf armor. On the left and right sides of the queue, because of their good standing positions, the surviving golden robes looked at Bloodwind's galloping back with horror on their faces. The captain of the guard behind the city gate shouted to chase him, but no one dared to move. From the Gate of the Gods in the northwest to the Red Castle in the southeast, there are wide bluestone roads, so that Bloodwind does not have to go around narrow alleys. However, after entering King's Landing, due to the influence of various ramps, stairs, stalls and other miscellaneous factors, its speed gradually slowed down. Moreover, there were dense crowds all along the way. Although they screamed and ran away as soon as they saw Bloodwind, they always hindered its forward speed. If it were in the past, Bloodwind could jump to the roof and avoid various obstacles below by continuous jumping. However, with its current weight, many civilian buildings in this era will collapse because they cannot bear its weight, just like the fragile roof of the small hotel. Of course, the walls of King's Landing, the Dragon Cave, the Red Castle and the noble buildings near Egan's High Hill are completely no problem. After all, they have been tested by the weight of the dragon. Shoemaker Square, where the burned debris was just cleaned up in the past 2 days, is a must-go place for Bloodwind to go to the Red Castle. When he saw the signal smoke floating in the air in the direction of the Gate of the Gods, James just rushed to the Shoemaker Square with his soldiers. The smoke was the signal of the failure of the trap he had set in advance. Although he didn't know whether there was an accident at the inn because of the direwolf, he turned his head and looked at the red castle in the distance. He knew that Robb's ultimate goal must be to rescue Eddard in the Black Cell. So, Jaime gave an order and lined up the soldiers in the Shoemaker Square, waiting for their arrival. Click, click. In the secret passage of the empty cell in the Black Cell of the Red Castle, Robb pulled Sansa out from it. He gently opened the cell door and observed the corridor of the Black Cell. There was no one in the corridor. The door of the Black Cell was directly opened wide. A bunch of cell keys fell at the door, and a torch was burning on the wall of the corridor. Time was running out. Robb didn't continue to observe. He turned around and took out the ice from the black cloth scabbard held by Sansa, then walked forward, closed the door of the Black Cell, and picked up the cell key on the ground. I don't know what happened in the Black Prison. The two ugly criminals were very quiet this time. Moreover, when Robb passed by Jaqen's cell, he smelled a strong smell of blood. But he didn't have time to find out now. He took Sansa directly to Eddard's cell and opened the door with the cell key. Sansa came from behind with the scabbard of the ice sword in one hand and took down the torch on the wall with the other hand. The brother and sister entered the cell together with excitement to rescue their father. Thanks to the will of the Fire King and the little monsters fighting the little Ultraman for the points and rewards. Thanks to Devilpool and Pink fleeing people for the monthly votes. At the same time, thank you for all the big guys who vote for recommendations and follow the reading every day. Thank you for your support. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.